Picture the desert, endless waves of golden sand, shifting endlessly under the blazing sun, hiding secrets so profound they defy our very understanding of history. Now imagine these sands parting, if only for a moment, to reveal the ghostly outline of a lost city, crumbling towers, silent streets, forgotten temples standing as haunting echoes of civilizations that once thrived where now only emptiness remains. These are not mere legends or mirages. These are real kingdoms, real cultures, real people whose stories were swallowed by the desert, erased from memory for centuries. We're about to embark on a journey to uncover 30 of these forgotten kingdoms, each one a testament to human ambition, resilience, and the heartbreaking fragility of even the greatest empires. From the bustling trade hubs of the ancient Silk Road to the oasis capitals that once pulsed with life, these kingdoms flourished against all odds, building wonders in some of the most unforgiving environments on Earth. They engineered sophisticated water systems, created art and architecture that rivaled the finest of their time, and forged identities uniquely adapted to the harsh beauty of the desert. And then, one by one, they vanished, sometimes gradually, eroded by shifting climates or economic change, sometimes suddenly, buried under sandstorms or abandoned after conflict. What remains of them today are fragments, whispers in the wind, ruins peeking through the dunes, artifacts waiting to tell their stories to those willing to listen. This is more than a history lesson. It's an exploration of human tenacity and mystery. We'll traverse continents and eras, from the legendary city of Ubar, said to have been punished by divine wrath, to the Nabataean marvel of Petra, carved into rose-red cliffs and lost to the Western world for 1,000 years. We'll uncover how these kingdoms rose, why they fell, and what they leave behind, not just as archaeological curiosities, but as profound reminders of our shared past. So settle in and open your mind to the mysteries waiting beneath the sands. Together, we're stepping into the unknown to rediscover worlds thought lost forever. Our journey into the sands begins with a legend, a name that echoed through centuries as a cautionary tale of greed and divine retribution. Ubar, often called the Atlantis of the sands. For generations, this fabled city was thought to be pure fiction, a mythical place born from the pages of the Quran and the enchanting stories of 1001 Nights. The ancient text spoke of a fabulously wealthy hub for the frankincense trade, a commodity once as precious as gold, whose people grew so arrogant and corrupt that they were punished, swallowed whole by the desert as a lesson for all eternity. For a long time, historians dismissed it as a moral fable, not a real place you could ever hope to find on a map. But the desert, as it so often does, held onto its secret, waiting for the right moment to reveal the truth. That moment arrived not with a lone adventurer on a camel, but with the eyes of modern technology gazing down from the heavens. In the 1990s, a team of researchers, guided by satellite imagery and radar that could peer beneath the surface of the sand, began to pinpoint strange, ancient caravan routes in the desolate expanse of Oman's empty quarter. These trails, invisible from the ground, all seemed to converge on one specific, barren spot. Following these technological breadcrumbs, archaeologists began to dig, and what they unearthed was nothing short of extraordinary. The massive foundations of an octagonal fortress, towers that had toppled into deep caverns below, and artifacts that spoke of immense wealth and trade. This was no myth. They had found the real Ubar, or at least its magnificent ruins. The city was a linchpin of the ancient world's economy, a crucial way station where camel trains laden with fragrant frankincense resin would gather before embarking on perilous journeys to the empires of Egypt, Rome, and Persia. The people of Ubar mastered the art of survival in an utterly hostile environment, likely tapping into underground water sources to create their oasis of civilization. So what could possibly bring such a powerful and sophisticated kingdom to such a sudden and catastrophic end? The evidence points to the very ground beneath their feet. The city was built over a large limestone cavern, a natural reservoir that provided their precious water. Geologists believe this cavern roof eventually collapsed, perhaps triggered by a tremor or simply weakened over time, creating a massive sinkhole that devoured entire sections of the city. In a cruel twist of fate, the source of their life became the instrument of their destruction. The desert, ever patient, simply blew in over the wreckage, burying the Atlantis of the sands until it became exactly what we thought it was, a legend waiting to be rediscovered. But if Ubar's story is one of sudden, catastrophic collapse, our next lost kingdom presents a far more gradual and complex tale of ingenuity slowly being overwhelmed by an uncooperative world. Deep within the vast, arid expanse of the Sahara, in what is now modern-day Libya, the Garamantes built a civilization so advanced it completely upends our traditional view of desert societies. For over 1,000 years, from around 500 before the Common Era to 700 of the Common Era, they weren't just surviving in one of the harshest environments on the planet. They were thriving, transforming their barren landscape into a lush, agricultural heartland through a feat of engineering so brilliant it seems almost impossible. Their secret weapon lay hidden beneath the burning sands, water. The Garamantes discovered vast fossil water aquifers, ancient reservoirs that had been sealed underground for millennia. Tapping into this precious resource was their masterstroke. They didn't just dig simple wells, they engineered a complex network of underground tunnels known as fagaras, or in Persian, kanats. These were not mere holes in the ground. Workers would dig a mother well deep into the water table and then carve out horizontal tunnels for miles, gently sloping downward so that gravity would pull the water silently and efficiently to the surface, all while preventing evaporation under the relentless Saharan sun. This wasn't just technology, it was a form of art, a sustained act of defiance against the desert that allowed them to cultivate grapes, figs, barley, and wheat where nothing should have grown. This agricultural wealth fueled a powerful and sophisticated society. The Garamantes were far from the simple nomads described by their Roman enemies. They built at least 8 major towns and numerous fortified villages, with their capital, Garama, boasting towering mud brick structures. They were skilled warriors and masterful traders, controlling the trans-Saharan trade routes for gold, ivory, and salt, connecting the Mediterranean world with the deep interior of Africa. Their influence was so significant that even the mighty Roman Empire took notice, not as a mere nuisance, but as a genuine rival. The Romans eventually launched a full-scale military campaign to subdue them, not to wipe them out, but to force this formidable kingdom into the empire's sphere of influence, a testament to the Garamantes' real power. So what happened to these hydraulic wizards of the desert? Their decline is a sobering lesson in the unsustainable use of resources. They were essentially mining water, extracting a finite resource that could not be replenished. Over centuries, the water tables dropped, their magnificent fagaras ran dry, and the desert began to reclaim its land. This was likely accelerated by a shifting climate that became even drier. The final blow came with the Arab conquests of the 7th century, which disrupted the ancient trade networks that were their economic lifeblood. Slowly, inevitably, their green fields turned back to dust. Today, all that remains are the haunting ruins of their mud brick forts and thousands of tombs staring out from the emptiness, a silent monument to a civilization that dared to make the desert bloom. While the Garamantes were harnessing water to defy the Sahara, far to the southeast along the fertile banks of the Nile, another desert power was rising to challenge the greatest empire of the ancient world. We journey now from the sands of Libya to the sun-baked terrain of Nubia, in what is today northern Sudan, to uncover the story of the Kingdom of Kush. For centuries, the narrative of this region was written solely by its northern neighbor, Egypt, which often depicted the Kushites as a conquered people, a source of gold and slaves. But this is a story of reversal, of the pupil not only surpassing the master but coming to rule the master's kingdom. The Kushites were far more than just neighbors to Egypt. They were their rivals, their equals, and ultimately their pharaohs. The rise of Kush is a testament to strategic adaptation. Initially, their power center was at the city of Nabataean, nestled at the foot of the holy mountain Jebel Barkal, which the Egyptians believed was the southern home of their god Ammon. The Kushites absorbed immense cultural and religious influence from Egypt, adopting hieroglyphs, worshipping a similar pantheon of gods, and even building their own version of pyramids. But they were never mere imitators. Their moment of supreme triumph came during a period of weakness in Egypt, known as the Third Intermediate Period. Seizing the opportunity, the Kushite king Pi launched a military campaign northward around 747 before the Common Era. In a stunning conquest, he unified a fractured Egypt under his rule, establishing the 25th dynasty and becoming the first of the Black Pharaohs. For nearly a century, the Kushite pharaohs ruled a unified Egypt and Nubia, restoring traditional Egyptian art, architecture, and religious practices, which they saw themselves as protecting and revitalizing. Eventually, pressure from the rising Assyrian Empire with its advanced iron weaponry forced the Kushite rulers to retreat south from Egypt, but this was not the end of their kingdom, it was a rebirth. They established a new capital at Meroë, and it was here that Kush truly came into its own, developing a culture that was distinctly and proudly African. Meroë became an industrial powerhouse of the ancient world. The city sat on vast reserves of iron ore and timber from nearby forests, allowing the Kushites to become one of Africa's earliest and most prolific centers of iron production. The skies over Meroë would have been constantly filled with the smoke from countless furnaces, earning it the nickname the Birmingham of Africa among modern archaeologists. This technological edge fueled their economy and military might. The city was also marked by its unique architectural achievements. They continued the pyramid-building tradition of their northern ancestors, but they made it their own. The pyramids of Meroë are steeper, narrower, and smaller than their Egyptian counterparts, creating a dramatic and unmistakable skyline against the desert horizon. Furthermore, the Kushites developed their own writing system, known as Meroitic script. It's one of the oldest known scripts in Africa, and tragically, it remains largely undeciphered today, meaning a vast library of their history, literature, and economic records is still silent, waiting for its Rosetta Stone. So what led to the fall of such an inventive and resilient kingdom? The decline of Kush was not a single event but a slow unraveling caused by a combination of environmental and economic pressures. Their massive iron production required enormous amounts of charcoal, leading to widespread deforestation around Meroë. This ecological disaster would have led to soil erosion and a decreased ability to sustain agriculture, weakening the state from within. At the same time, the ancient world's economic landscape was shifting. New trade routes emerged that bypassed the Nile, favoring routes across the Red Sea and the rising power of Axum in Ethiopia. This crippled Kush's economy, which was heavily reliant on its role as a middleman in trade between sub-Saharan Africa and the Mediterranean. Weakened and impoverished, the kingdom became vulnerable. Finally, in the 4th century of the Common Era, the Axumite king Azona recorded his invasion and sacking of Meroë. The once great capital was gradually abandoned, and the relentless desert sands began their slow, patient work of burial, hiding the legacy of the Black Pharaohs for over a millennium. Leaving the sun-bleached pyramids of Kush behind, we now venture into the arid canyons of southern Jordan, where an even more audacious architectural marvel lies hidden. The story of the Nabataean kingdom is a masterclass in turning perceived weakness into unimaginable strength. Imagine a people with no vast farmlands, no great forests for timber, and no major river to sustain them. Instead, they possessed something far more valuable in the ancient world, a geographic stranglehold on the flow of riches. The Nabataeans were the undisputed masters of the incense trade, and from their remote desert stronghold, they built a capital so breathtaking and so well protected that its very existence seemed impossible. Their greatest achievement, the city of Petra, is a testament to this ingenuity. To approach it, you wouldn't march across an open plain. You would be funneled into the Sik, a deep, narrow natural gorge winding through towering cliffs. This mile-long canyon, with walls soaring 200 feet high, was the city's primary defense, a natural bottleneck where a small force could hold off an army. And then, at the end of this shadowy, winding path, the canyon suddenly opens to reveal the most famous facade of all, Al-Khosneh, or the Treasury. Carved directly into the vibrant rose-red sandstone cliff face, its Hellenistic columns and intricate sculptures appear not as a structure built from the ground up, but as if the very mountain itself had been sculpted by gods. This was just the beginning. The Nabataeans didn't build their city, they engineered the negative space within it, carving hundreds of elaborate tombs, temples, and even a massive Roman-style theater directly into the rock, creating a permanent, erosion-resistant metropolis of stone. But the true genius of Petra wasn't just what was visible on the cliff faces. It was the hidden, life-sustaining network they built beneath them. In a region that receives barely 6 inches of rain a year, the Nabataeans performed what can only be described as hydrological magic. They transformed their desert capital into a veritable garden city with lush gardens and even swimming pools. Their secret was an incredibly sophisticated water management system that would be the envy of many modern cities. They constructed miles of terracotta pipes, expertly designed to minimize evaporation and sediment buildup. They carved countless channels and dams to capture every precious drop of seasonal floodwater from the surrounding plateaus, channeling it into a series of over 200 cisterns that could hold millions of gallons of water. This system provided not only for daily consumption, but also created a surplus that allowed them to entertain guests, maintain public baths, and project an image of abundance and power to every visiting trader and diplomat. This control over water was the foundation of their economic power. Petra sat at the crossroads of major trade routes linking China, India, and Arabia with Egypt, Greece, and Rome. Camel caravans laden with frankincense, myrrh, silks, and spices had no choice but to pass through Nabataean territory. The kingdom grew fabulously wealthy by taxing this trade, effectively creating one of the world's first great commercial empires built not on conquest but on commerce and logistics. For centuries, they maintained their independence by expertly playing the powerful empires around them off one another, acting as a crucial buffer zone and indispensable partner. Their independence, however, could not last forever. The rising power of the Roman Empire, with its insatiable appetite for Eastern luxuries, increasingly saw the Nabataean middlemen as an obstacle to be removed rather than a partner to be respected. In 106 of the Common Era, the Roman Emperor Trajan formally annexed the kingdom, transforming it into the province of Arabia Petraea. Initially, this brought a new wave of Roman construction, like the grand colonnaded street that runs through the city's center. But the annexation was the beginning of a long, slow decline. The Romans began to favor sea routes through the Red Sea for transporting goods, bypassing the overland caravans that were Petra's lifeblood. The city's economic importance gradually dwindled. The final blows were delivered not by armies but by nature itself. A devastating earthquake in 363 of the Common Era destroyed large parts of the city. Another major quake in 551 shattered it further. With the trade routes dry and the infrastructure broken, the once great capital could not be sustained. People slowly moved away, seeking opportunity elsewhere. The magnificent water channels silted up and fell into disrepair. Without the Nabataeans' constant, skilled maintenance, the desert began its reclamation project. Sand dunes crept through the Sik, burying the streets and plazas. For centuries, Petra was left to the local Bedouin and their herds, its location becoming little more than a mysterious legend in the West, a lost city waiting for a Swiss explorer to unveil its secrets to the world once more. From the rose-red canyons of Petra, we travel south, skirting the rim of the Arabian Peninsula to the rugged highlands of the Horn of Africa. Here, rising from the Ethiopian plateau, was a kingdom whose power and reach were so immense it fundamentally shaped the ancient world's understanding of Africa. Forget the old European idea of a dark continent waiting to be discovered. The kingdom of Axum was a beacon of civilization, a contemporary and equal of Rome, Persia, and China. This was not a remote outpost, it was the heart of a vast commercial empire, a convert to Christianity decades before Rome itself, and the origin of legends that would endure for millennia. Axum's power was forged by its unparalleled strategic location. While other kingdoms relied on arduous desert crossings, Axum commanded the southern entrance to the Red Sea, a maritime superhighway connecting the Mediterranean world with the Indian Ocean. From its port of Adulis, a constant flow of goods moved through its hands. Ivory from the African interior, tortoiseshell, rhinoceros horn, and gold traveled north to the Roman Empire, while silks, spices, and steel flowed back from India and the East. This trade generated staggering wealth, which the Axumite kings used to build a state that was both formidable and sophisticated. They minted their own currency, beautiful gold, silver, and bronze coins bearing the faces of their rulers, a bold statement of economic independence and prestige that circulated from Alexandria to Ceylon. Their engineering prowess was channeled into the creation of truly monumental architecture, most famously the towering, needle-like obelisks known as stelae. Carved from single blocks of granite and standing over 100 feet tall, these were not mere decorations. They were funerary markers for the elite, intricately carved to resemble multi-story buildings with false doors and windows, symbolizing a gateway to the afterlife. The precision with which they were quarried, transported, and erected remains a marvel of ancient engineering. Perhaps the most profound and lasting transformation in Axum's history was its conversion to Christianity in the 4th century of the Common Era under King Ezana. This was not a slow cultural seepage, it was a deliberate, state-led adoption that redefined the kingdom's very identity. The story, as preserved by the Church, tells of a Phoenician philosopher named Frumentius who was shipwrecked on the Axumite coast, rose to a position of trust in the royal court, and eventually converted the young heir Ezana. Once king, Ezana made Christianity the state religion, replacing the symbols of the sun and moon on his coins with the cross. This decision anchored Axum firmly within the sphere of Eastern Christendom, linking it theologically and culturally to Constantinople and Alexandria, and creating a unique African Christian tradition that has endured uninterrupted for over 1,600 years. The Church of Our Lady Mary of Zion in Axum is still believed by millions of Ethiopian Orthodox Christians to house the Ark of the Covenant, a testament to the deep and sacred legacy of this ancient kingdom. Yet, for all its strength and divine favor, the Axumite Empire eventually faltered and receded from the world stage. Its decline is a complex puzzle with several interlocking pieces, a slow unraveling rather than a single catastrophic fall. One major theory points to environmental overreach. The very agriculture that supported its large population may have led to its undoing. Centuries of intensive farming and deforestation on the Ethiopian plateau are believed to have caused severe soil exhaustion and erosion, crippling the agricultural base that fed the empire's heartland. This ecological stress may have been exacerbated by a shift in the global climate, perhaps a prolonged drought linked to the same climatic changes affecting other contemporary civilizations, which would have placed immense pressure on Axum's resources. But the most decisive blow was likely economic. The 7th century saw the meteoric rise of the Islamic caliphates, which rapidly expanded across the Middle East and North Africa. While there is little evidence of direct military conflict between Axum and the early Islamic powers, in fact, Islamic tradition holds that the Axumite king offered sanctuary to some of the Prophet Muhammad's earliest followers. the geopolitical shift was catastrophic for Axum's economy. The new Islamic empires now controlled the northern termini of the Red Sea trade routes. More importantly, they began to favor and protect trade routes that ran through the Persian Gulf, deliberately bypassing the Red Sea and Axum altogether. The lifeblood of Axum's wealth, its control over maritime trade, was slowly cut off. Isolated from its traditional commercial networks and struggling with environmental degradation at home, the kingdom's power withered. The once bustling port of Adulis silted up and was abandoned. The kings moved their capital to a more defensible inland location, and the grand city of Axum itself slowly shrank from a cosmopolitan imperial capital into a provincial religious center. The desert, ever patient, did not need to bury Axum in sand. It was simply left behind by a changing world, its magnificent stelae toppling one by one, standing as silent, lonely sentinels over a forgotten glory. Just south of the powerful kingdom of Kush, buried in the silt of the Nile and the encroaching sands of northern Sudan, lies evidence of a civilization even more ancient and enigmatic. Long before the Kushites ruled as pharaohs, another mighty African kingdom rose to challenge the supremacy of Egypt itself. This is the story of the Kingdom of Kerma, a name that echoes from a time when the Sahara was greener and one of Africa's first great states forged its own unique path to power, completely independent of its northern neighbor. For over 1,000 years, from around 2,500 to 1,500 before the Common Era, Kerma was not just a city but the heart of a vast and sophisticated culture. Unlike the Egyptians, who were renowned for their stone monuments and hieroglyphic records, the people of Kerma left behind a different kind of legacy, one built from earth and clay. Their most striking architectural achievements were the Defufa's colossal mud brick structures that dominated their urban landscape. The Western Defufa, the largest of these, still stands an impressive 60 feet tall after more than 3,500 years. This was not a temple in the traditional Egyptian sense, but a multifunctional fortified religious center, a sprawling complex with corridors, stairways, and shrines, all crafted from millions of sun-dried bricks. Its sheer size and durability speak to a highly organized society capable of mobilizing labor on a monumental scale, creating landmarks that were meant to last for eternity. The society that built these structures was remarkably wealthy and complex. Kerma was a hub of trade, connecting the riches of sub-Saharan Africa: ivory, ebony, exotic animal skins, and most importantly, gold, with the insatiable markets of Egypt to the north. Their craftspeople were masters of their art, producing incredibly fine pottery with ripple effect surfaces and elegant, thin-walled forms that are instantly recognizable to archaeologists. They were also skilled metalworkers, creating beautiful jewelry and weaponry, but perhaps their most poignant artifacts are the grave goods found in their vast cemeteries. Here, elites were buried in circular tombs, often accompanied by hundreds of human and animal sacrifices, a practice that shocked the Egyptians and demonstrated the immense power and perceived divinity of Kerma's rulers. These tombs reveal a society with a deeply spiritual belief system and a rigid, powerful social hierarchy. This wealth and power inevitably brought Kerma into direct conflict with its northern neighbor. For centuries, the relationship between Kerma and Egypt was a tense dance of trade, rivalry, and outright warfare. Egyptian records from the Middle Kingdom period refer to Kerma as wretched Kush, and describe building massive fortresses along the Nile to protect their southern border from the formidable armies of the Kerma kingdom. The Egyptians had good reason to be fearful. Kerma was not a mere tribal confederation, it was a centralized state with a powerful military. In a stunning reversal of the usual narrative, there is compelling evidence that during a period of Egyptian weakness known as the Second Intermediate Period, the Kingdom of Kerma may have even expanded its influence northward, perhaps forming alliances with or even briefly controlling parts of Upper Egypt. The thought of a powerful African kingdom exerting its influence over a fractured Egypt completely upends the traditional view of this ancient dynamic. This era of Kerman ascendancy could not last forever. The reunification of Egypt under the powerful pharaohs of the new empire marked the beginning of the end. Pharaohs like Ahmose and Amenhotep I began pushing south, reclaiming territory and reasserting Egyptian dominance. The final, decisive blow was delivered by Pharaoh Thutmose I around 1500 before the Common Era. His armies marched south, conquering the kingdom, sacking its capital city, and burning its royal palace to the ground. To symbolize his total victory, he allegedly ordered the construction of a massive victory fortress right in the heart of the defeated city, a permanent reminder of Egyptian supremacy. The independent Kingdom of Kerma was extinguished, and the region would be governed as a colonial province of Egypt for the next 500 years. Yet, the desert has a way of reclaiming its own. While the political power of Kerma was broken, its physical remnants were slowly consumed by a different force. The climate of the Sahara has been shifting for millennia, and the areas that were once the thriving hinterlands of the Kerma kingdom gradually became drier. Sand from the expanding desert began to blow over the abandoned sites, burying the lower towns and satellite villages. The ancient city of Duki Gel, a significant religious and political center just a mile from the main capital, is a prime example. For centuries, it lay hidden under layers of silt and sand, its secrets preserved but completely forgotten. It was only through modern archaeology that Duki Gel was rediscovered, revealing a complex urban plan with temples, palaces, and fortifications that have dramatically expanded our understanding of just how vast and influential the Kerma civilization truly was. The sands that once threatened to erase it entirely have ironically become its greatest protector, sealing its legacy until we were finally ready to listen to its story. Leaving the fertile banks of the Nile and the grand stele of Axum behind, our journey now takes us deep into the heart of Asia, to one of the most remote and perilous deserts on Earth. We venture into the Taklamakan, a vast sea of shifting sand dunes in what is now Western China, a place whose very name is said to mean, "You go in, but you never come out." It was here, on the treacherous branch of the Silk Road that skirted this deadly obstacle, that the oasis kingdom of Loulan flourished against all odds. For centuries, Loulan was not just a stop on the map. It was a vital sanctuary, a place where exhausted travelers and merchants could find life-saving water, shelter, and supplies after weeks of battling the desert's fury. But this crucial hub met a fate that is both tragic and eerily prescient, becoming a ghost town preserved in time by the very sands that once threatened it. The rediscovery of Loulan is a story straight out of an adventure novel. In the early 20th century, Swedish explorer Sven Hedin was attempting to cross the Taklamakan when a sudden sandstorm forced his team to take shelter. When the storm passed, they found themselves lost, with their water supplies running dangerously low. In a desperate search for a way out, Hedin stumbled upon the remains of ancient wooden structures poking through the dunes. His local guide, upon seeing the ruins, immediately identified them as the legendary city of Loulan, a place spoken of in whispers but long thought to be a myth. Hedin's subsequent excavations revealed an astonishingly well-preserved administrative and military outpost, complete with homes, government buildings, and a towering Buddhist stupa, all silently waiting under the sand. But the most profound discoveries were yet to come. Later archaeological expeditions would uncover cemeteries on the outskirts of the city, and within them, bodies that had been naturally mummified by the desert's extreme dry air and salty soil. These were not skeletal remains, they were people frozen in time with their hair, skin, clothing, and even the expressions on their faces perfectly intact. The most famous of these is the so-called Beauty of Loulan, a woman who died nearly 3,800 years ago. She was found wrapped in a simple woolen cloak and wearing goatskin moccasins, her features so well preserved that one can easily imagine her walking the streets of the ancient city. Scientific analysis revealed she was in her 40s when she died, and a CT scan showed hardened arteries and traces of sand in her lungs, suggesting a life of hardship in a dusty environment. But her existence and that of other mummies found in the region raised a monumental historical question. These individuals have distinctly European features, light hair, tall frames, and wore plaid woolen textiles that look Celtic. Their presence proves that the Taklamakan Desert was a crossroads of humanity far earlier than previously believed, with migrations from the west occurring millennia before the formal opening of the Silk Road. Loulan was a melting pot at the edge of the world. For all its early resilience, the Loulan of the Silk Road era met a sudden and silent end. Chinese historical records from the Tang dynasty note that around the year 630 of the Common Era, a diplomatic envoy was sent to Loulan only to find the city completely abandoned. The streets were empty, the buildings were still, and the only sound was the wind whistling through the deserted structures. So what caused the people to simply walk away from their homes, leaving their possessions behind? The evidence points to a single critical failure. The water stopped flowing. Loulan's existence was entirely dependent on the waters of the Tarim River, which snaked its way from the distant mountains to create a life-giving oasis in the desert. Without it, Loulan was nothing. Theories for this hydrological catastrophe point to both human and natural causes. A shift in climate may have caused the glaciers in the mountains to recede, reducing the meltwater that fed the river. Or a major tectonic event could have altered the landscape, diverting the river's course away from the city. However, many scholars also point to the actions of Loulan's own inhabitants. To support its agriculture and growing population, the kingdom would have engaged in extensive irrigation, which can drastically alter a river's flow over time. It's a heartbreakingly modern story. A society, in its efforts to grow and prosper, might have inadvertently engineered its own demise by over-exploiting the very resource it depended on for survival. As the river dwindled, the desert began its final, inexorable advance. Sandstorms buried the irrigation canals, the fields turned to dust. The people of Loulan had no choice but to gather what they could and leave, becoming climate refugees in their own time, vanishing into the dunes from whence they came. Today, the ruins of the Loulan fortress stand as a stark, lonely monument to this fragility, a silent warning about the delicate balance between civilization and the environment that sustains it. Far to the west, on the other side of the continent from Kush and Axum, another desert kingdom rose to legendary status, its name synonymous with unimaginable wealth. We speak, of course, of Ghana, but it is crucial to clarify that this was not the modern nation of Ghana, which chose the name at independence to honor this great historical predecessor. The original Ghana, also known as Wagadu to its people, was a sprawling empire that dominated West Africa for centuries, a powerhouse whose capital city was the beating heart of the trans-Saharan trade and the very source of the fabled land of gold legends that tantalized medieval Europe and the Arab world. From roughly the 6th to the 13th centuries, the Ghana Empire held a geographic and economic advantage that made it the undisputed master of its region. Its power was anchored in its control of the trade routes that crisscrossed the Sahara. Picture enormous camel caravans, sometimes consisting of thousands of animals, embarking on a perilous 2-month journey across the world's largest desert. These caravans moved northward carrying the most sought-after commodities of the age, gold, ivory, and enslaved people. They returned south laden with equally precious goods, salt vital for preserving food in the tropical heat, copper, fine cloth, and horses. The kings of Ghana did not simply trade these goods, they controlled them. They imposed taxes on every ounce of merchandise that entered or left their territory. The most famous account comes from the 11th century Andalusian geographer al-Bakri, who described a breathtaking system. He wrote that for every donkey load of salt that entered the empire, the king collected a tax of 1 golden dinar, and for every load of salt that left, he collected 2. With such a lucrative system, it is no wonder that the king was renowned for his opulence, said to hold court surrounded by gold-adorned guards, with even the royal dogs wearing collars of gold and silver. The heart of this commercial empire was its capital, Kamba Sale, located in what is today southeastern Mauritania. For a long time, historians doubted its scale and sophistication, imagining it as a large village of mud huts. Archaeological excavations have proven them utterly wrong. Kamba Sale was a major metropolitan center, one of the largest cities in the world at its peak. It was a dual city comprising two distinct districts separated by about 6 miles. One was a royal and spiritual center, home to the king and his court, a traditional African complex with a sacred grove where priests communicated with the empire's deities. The other was a vibrant, bustling commercial and artisanal quarter, and this is where the discoveries truly astonish. Archaeologists unearthed the foundations of massive stone buildings, a rarity in West Africa at the time, including multi-story homes with complex floor plans, suggesting a wealthy and sophisticated urban elite. Most remarkably, they found the remains of a dozen mosques, complete with their mihrabs pointing toward Mecca. This speaks to a cosmopolitan and religiously diverse city where a large Muslim merchant community lived and worshipped alongside the traditionalist ruling class, a fascinating early example of peaceful coexistence driven by economic necessity. Yet, this magnificent empire, built on a foundation of gold and trade, could not last forever. Its decline was the result of a devastating combination of external aggression and internal ecological collapse. The first major blow came from the north in the form of the Almoravids, a zealous Berber movement from the Maghreb. Initially, the Almoravids were just another trading partner, but their ambitions soon turned military. Around 1076 of the Common Era, after years of conflict, they succeeded in sacking Kamba Sale. While they did not hold the city for long, the attack crippled the empire's aura of invincibility, destabilized its government, and most critically, disrupted the golden trade routes that were the source of its wealth. However, the Almoravids were not the sole cause of Ghana's fall. A more insidious enemy was already at work: the desert itself. The empire's heartland was not always arid. Paleoclimatologists have found evidence that a prolonged and severe drought began to afflict the region in the 11th and 12th centuries, precisely during the empire's later years. This climatic shift would have been catastrophic. The agricultural base that fed the large population of Kamba Sale would have failed, leading to famine and social unrest. Furthermore, the empire's success may have contributed to its own environmental undoing. A large population and its vast herds of cattle likely led to overgrazing and deforestation around the capital, stripping the land of its protective vegetation and making it more vulnerable to the advancing desert. Without food, its trade routes under attack, and its political unity fractured, the empire began to implode. Subject peoples rose in rebellion, sensing the central power's weakness. Within a century of the Almoravid invasion, the once mighty Ghana Empire had collapsed, its territories splintering among smaller successor states. The great city of Kamba Sale was gradually abandoned, its stone buildings crumbling and then being slowly, inevitably, buried by the relentless sands of the Sahara, waiting centuries for archaeologists to reveal the true scale of what was lost. Leaving the gold-rich empires of West Africa behind, we now cross the vast expanse of the Sahara and the Arabian Peninsula, arriving in the sun-scorched plains of northern Iraq. Here, rising from the arid landscape like a mirage of defiance, stood the formidable Kingdom of Hatra. In an era defined by the colossal struggle between two superpowers, the Roman Empire in the west and the Parthian Empire in the east, Hatra was not merely a city. It was a seemingly impregnable fortress, a wealthy religious sanctuary, and a masterful political player that expertly balanced between giants for centuries, earning a reputation as the unconquerable thorn in Rome's side. The first thing any approaching army would have seen was its legendary fortifications. Hatra was encircled by not one, but two massive concentric walls, the inner one towering over 30 feet high and reinforced with more than 160 towers. These weren't simple barriers, they were an advanced defensive system designed to withstand the most sophisticated siege engines of the ancient world. The space between the two walls created a deadly killing ground for any attackers who managed to breach the outer perimeter. But the true genius of Hatra's defense lay in its location. Built in the heart of the desert, the city had no local source of stone or timber. This meant any invading Roman army, famous for its relentless siegecraft, would have to haul all its heavy equipment and building materials for new siege works across hundreds of miles of barren, hostile territory, a logistical nightmare that sapped strength and morale before a single arrow was fired. This incredible defensive prowess allowed Hatra to flourish as a grand religious center, a sacred destination known throughout the region. The city was dedicated to the sun god, Shamash, but its true spiritual life was a fascinating fusion of cultures. Alongside Shamash, deities from the Greek, Aramean, and Arabian pantheons were worshipped, reflecting the diverse nature of its citizens and traders. At the heart of the city stood the enormous sacred precinct, a walled temple complex that was a marvel of architectural synthesis. Here, a visitor would have been astonished by the sight of grand temples built in a distinct Eastern style, featuring soaring Iwan's vaulted hallways open on one side, standing right beside classical Greek columns and intricate Roman sculptural friezes. This wasn't a haphazard mix, it was a deliberate and confident blending of artistic traditions, creating a unique aesthetic that shouted the city's independence and cosmopolitan identity to the world. The wealth required to build such a spectacular city flowed from its control of vital caravan routes, making it a wealthy hub for trade and a coveted prize for any expanding empire. Hatra's political strategy was as sophisticated as its architecture. The rulers of Hatra, who held the title of Emawai or Lord, were masters of realpolitik. For over 2 centuries, they skillfully played the Roman and Parthian empires against each other, switching allegiances when beneficial and using their formidable defenses to maintain their autonomy. This diplomatic dance infuriated Rome. The empire launched numerous major campaigns to subdue this defiant desert kingdom. The most famous attempts were led by the emperors Trajan and Septimius Severus. In 117 and again in 198, massive Roman legions surrounded Hatra, employing their full arsenal of ballistae, siege towers, and battering rams. According to historical accounts, the defenders rained down parts filled with deadly scorpions and biting insects on the besiegers, a terrifying form of ancient biological warfare. Both times, the mighty Roman army was forced to retreat, humiliated, their siege engines abandoned and burning outside the inviolable walls. Hatra's reputation for being unconquerable was sealed. This golden age of independence, however, came to a sudden and brutal end with the rise of a new power in Persia. The Parthian Empire was overthrown by the far more centralized and aggressive Sasanian dynasty. The Sasanians, under the ambitious King Shapur I, had no patience for the delicate balance of power that Hatra had thrived upon. They viewed the kingdom not as a buffer but as an obstacle to their expansion westward. In 241, a massive Sasanian army marched on Hatra. The exact details of the final siege are lost to time, but ancient sources hint at a heartbreaking betrayal. The story goes that the daughter of the king of Hatra, betrayed by unrequited love for the Sasanian monarch, showed the enemy how to break the city's defenses. Whether this romantic tragedy is true or mere legend, the outcome was horrifyingly real. The Sasanians breached the legendary walls, sacked the city, and put its inhabitants to the sword. The great temples were desecrated, and the once bustling streets fell silent. The desert sands, as they always do, began their slow, patient work of burial. For centuries, Hatra slept under the dunes, a ghost known only from ancient texts. Its modern tragedy is a double layer of loss. extensive excavations in the 20th century had begun to reveal its spectacular ruins, allowing us to walk its streets and stand in its temples once more. But recently, this irreplaceable heritage has suffered devastating damage at the hands of deliberate destruction, a stark reminder that the forces that threaten history are not always natural. Despite this, archaeologists believe that the vast majority of Hatra still lies unexcavated. Its deepest secrets, the records of its people, the full extent of its temples, the truth behind its final fall still waiting, protected for now by the very sands that have preserved it for nearly 2 millennia. Meanwhile, as Hatra defiantly resisted Rome from the east, another desert power was rising to its west, crafting an empire from the wealth of trade and sheer force of will. In the heart of modern-day Syria, the oasis city of Palmyra emerged not just as a stop on the map, but as a brilliant cultural hybrid and a political powerhouse that would, for a breathtakingly brief moment, dare to reshape the entire Roman world. This was the domain of Queen Zenobia, a figure whose ambition and intellect turned a wealthy caravan city into the capital of a breakaway empire that stretched from Egypt to Turkey. Palmyra's story begins with its incredible geography. It sat at a critical nexus, a fertile oasis bridging the gap between the Mediterranean world, ruled by Rome, and the powerful Persian Empire to the east. Every caravan traveling the Silk Road between these two giants was funneled through Palmyra, and the city grew fantastically wealthy by taxing this flow of luxuries: Chinese silks, Indian spices, Arabian perfumes, and Roman glass and metals. This unique position also made Palmyra a cultural melting pot. Its people, a mix of Amorites, Arameans, and Arabs, developed a distinct identity, speaking a dialect of Aramaic but writing with a graceful script all their own. Their art and architecture reflected this fusion, blending Roman techniques with Persian and local Syrian influences to create a style that was uniquely Palmyran. The physical remains of the city before their tragic desecration were a testament to this synthesized grandeur. Visitors approaching Palmyra would first be greeted by the towering funerary towers that lined the outskirts, multi-story sandstone buildings where the city's elite were entombed with exquisite portrait sculptures. Moving into the city center, one would walk down the Grand Colonnade, an immense avenue over a kilometer long, flanked by hundreds of 20-foot-high Corinthian columns. Many of these columns had small projecting brackets about halfway up, which once held statues of the city's most wealthy and influential citizens, a permanent public record of its merchant princes. At the end of this magnificent street stood the spiritual heart of the city, the Temple of Bel. This was not a purely Greco-Roman temple, but a massive enclosure blending Near Eastern and classical designs, dedicated to the supreme Mesopotamian god Bel. Its sanctuary was one of the best preserved and most important religious buildings of the entire ancient world, a symbol of Palmyra's unique and confident culture. This wealthy, independent-minded city found its ultimate expression in one of history's most fascinating rulers, Queen Zenobia. Following the assassination of her husband, King Odenathus, who had been a loyal ally of Rome, Zenobia took power as regent for their young son. But she envisioned a far greater destiny, a woman of formidable intelligence, said to be fluent in Egyptian and Greek and a patron of philosophers. Zenobia saw the Roman Empire weakened by internal crisis and seized her moment. In 270 of the Common Era, she declared Palmyra's independence and launched a stunning military campaign. Her generals, with shocking speed, conquered Roman Egypt, swept through much of Anatolia, and reached as far as the shores of the Bosphorus. In a matter of years, Zenobia had carved out a Palmyran empire that controlled nearly a third of Rome's eastern territories. She even boldly minted coins bearing her own image alongside that of her son, and on the reverse, the image of the Roman emperor, a direct and audacious challenge to the authority of Rome itself. The Roman response was inevitable and devastating. The Emperor Aurelian, a brilliant and ruthless soldier, marched east to reclaim his empire. After defeating Zenobia's armies in 2 major battles, he laid siege to Palmyra itself. The city's desert defenses, which had long protected it from bandits and rivals, were no match for the full might of a determined Roman legion. Zenobia attempted to flee to Persia to seek aid but was captured before she could reach the border. Palmyra was sacked and its queen was taken back to Rome as a prisoner, where she was paraded in golden chains during Aurelian's triumph. The city was eventually allowed to continue as a minor Roman military outpost, but its glory days were over. A subsequent rebellion was crushed even more brutally, and Palmyra began its long, slow fade into obscurity, its grand buildings gradually succumbing to earthquakes and the encroaching desert sands. The modern tragedy of Palmyra is a heart-wrenching second death. After centuries of slumber, the city was rediscovered, and its ruins became one of the most important archaeological sites in the Middle East, a UNESCO World Heritage Site celebrated as a symbol of cultural synthesis and resilience. Then, in 2015, the world watched in horror as the terrorist group ISIS seized control of the area. In a calculated campaign of cultural cleansing, they systematically destroyed the Temple of Bel, blew up the iconic Arch of Triumph, and razed ancient tombs. They used the Roman amphitheater as a stage for public executions, seeking to erase the very memory of this pluralistic pre-Islamic civilization. The loss was incalculable, a violent assault on a heritage that belonged to all humanity. Yet, even in the face of such wanton destruction, the story of Palmyra is not one of utter defeat. Following the liberation of the site, an international effort of archaeologists, engineers, and conservators began the painstaking work of assessment and restoration. Using advanced photogrammetry, creating 3-dimensional models from thousands of pre-conflict tourist photos and drone footage, and the traditional skills of stonemasons, they are meticulously cataloging the fragments and planning for a potential rebuilding. Furthermore, vast areas of the city, particularly its residential quarters and necropolises, remain largely unexcavated beneath the sand. These untouched areas hold the potential to reveal the untold stories of Palmyra's everyday citizens, its merchants, its artists, and its families, the true heart of the city that Zenobia ruled. The sands that once buried Palmyra now ironically protect its final secrets, offering a fragile hope that the full narrative of this daring desert kingdom is not yet completely lost to time. While Palmyra and Hatra commanded the trade routes of the north, the true source of the ancient world's most precious commodities lay far to the south, in the arid highlands of what is now Yemen. Here, the air was once thick with the scent of frankincense and myrrh, resins so valuable they were worth their weight in gold. Controlling this lucrative trade required more than just merchants. It demanded powerful, organized kingdoms. Among the most formidable of these was the Kingdom of Main, a civilization of shrewd traders and skilled engineers whose name was once whispered in markets from the Mediterranean to the Indus Valley, yet today remains largely unknown. The Minians, as its people were known, rose to prominence around the 4th century before the Common Era, carving out their domain in the harsh interior of the Arabian Peninsula. Their power was not built on vast armies or territorial conquest, but on an almost monopolistic control over the production and transportation of incense. Frankincense trees, which only grow in the specific climatic conditions of southern Arabia and the Horn of Africa, produced a gum resin that was utterly essential to the religious and social rituals of the ancient world. It was burned in temples from Rome to Persia to purify the air and carry prayers to the gods. It was used in embalming, in perfumes, and as a universal symbol of wealth and piety. The Minians understood that whoever controlled the routes this treasure traveled upon held immense power. Their capital, the city of Karnac, was the nerve center of this operation. Unlike the grand, stone-carved capitals of other empires, Karnac was a city built for business and defense. It was surrounded by formidable walls, a necessity in a land of fierce competition, and its layout was pragmatic, centered around its role as a caravan assembly point. But the true voice of the Minoans comes not from grand ruins, but from the thousands of inscriptions they left behind. These are not epic poems or royal chronicles. They are meticulous business records, legal contracts, and dedications carved into stone. They tell us of a highly organized, oligarchic society ruled by a council of elders and a class of wealthy merchant families known as the Kabir. Their laws governed everything from taxation and property rights to the rules of the road for their caravans, creating a stable and predictable environment for commerce that stretched for thousands of miles. This success inevitably bred rivalry, most notably with their powerful neighbor to the south, the legendary Kingdom of Saba, home of the biblical Queen of Sheba. The relationship between Main and Saba was a complex dance of trade, diplomacy, and occasional outright conflict. For periods, the Minoans appear to have operated almost as junior partners or specialized transporters within the Sabaean sphere of influence. At other times, they asserted their full independence, competing fiercely for control over the northern branches of the incense trail. This rivalry played out not on vast battlefields, but in the subtle arenas of economic pressure, the establishment of competing trade outposts, and the shifting allegiances of the desert tribes who guided the caravans. It was a high-stakes game where the prize was a percentage of the ancient world's most valuable commodity. The most striking physical remnant of this forgotten kingdom is not Karnor, but the spectacularly preserved caravan city of Barakish. Walking through its ruins today is like stepping into a time capsule. Its massive defensive walls, complete with dozens of square towers, still stand to an impressive height, encircling a dense labyrinth of foundations, temples, and a central sanctuary. The city was a vital way station and a fortified warehouse on the incense route, a place where camel trains could rest, resupply, and pay their taxes in safety before embarking on the next perilous leg of their journey through the desert. The presence of a large temple dedicated to the god letter 2 BF a THTRR a B letter 1 A0D, the Minoan patron of commerce, underscores the inseparable link between their faith and their fortune. Barakish is a powerful, silent witness to the scale and sophistication of Minoan engineering and their absolute command over the logistics of desert trade. So what could cause the collapse of such a well-organized and economically critical kingdom? The fall of Main is a classic story of a civilization becoming a victim of its own success and of a changing world. The first blow was likely environmental. Centuries of intensive harvesting of frankincense and the grazing of the camel herds that carried it may have contributed to local deforestation and soil erosion, gradually degrading the already marginal agricultural land they depended on to feed their urban populations. This slow creep of desertification would have put increasing strain on their resources, but the decisive factor was a shift in global economics beyond their control. With the Roman annexation of Egypt and the rise of the Parthian Empire, new maritime technologies began to develop. By the 1st century of the Common Era, Greek and Roman sailors had mastered the monsoon winds of the Indian Ocean, allowing large ships to sail directly from Roman ports on the Red Sea to the markets of India, bypassing the arduous and expensive overland caravan routes entirely. Why spend months crossing a scorching desert, paying taxes at every fortified oasis, when a ship could carry 100 times the cargo in a fraction of the time? Almost overnight, the land route that had been the source of Minoan wealth became obsolete. The flow of gold dwindled to a trickle. Their political influence waned, and they were eventually absorbed by their rivals in Saba and Himyar. The great merchant families vanished, their laws were forgotten, and their cities were gradually abandoned to the sand, their intricate inscriptions slowly weathering away, waiting for modern archaeologists to decipher the story of the kingdom that built an empire on fragrance. But the most compelling discoveries are those that speak to the people themselves. The artifacts unearthed at Garama paint a picture of a surprisingly cosmopolitan society. Archaeologists have found fine Roman glassware, pottery from Greece, and jewelry styles influenced by sub-Saharan Africa, all within the same layers. This wasn't an isolated desert kingdom. It was a vibrant, multi-ethnic hub where Berber, Roman, Punic, and African cultures mingled and influenced one another. Inscriptions found at the site are written in the Garamantes language using an ancient Libyan script, but they sometimes reference names and gods from the Roman pantheon, suggesting a fascinating cultural syncretism. The Garamantes were not just passive recipients of foreign goods, they were active participants in a vast, interconnected ancient world, selectively adopting and adapting the elements that suited their unique desert civilization. Today, the work of understanding Garama continues, but the methods have evolved from shovels and brushes to cutting-edge technology. The relentless Sahara has reclaimed much of the city, burying its lower levels under meters of sand. However, this same sand has acted as a remarkable preservative, sealing structures and artifacts for centuries. Modern archaeologists are now using advanced laser scanning technology, specifically LiDAR, which can peer beneath the desert surface from aircraft. This technology is revolutionizing our understanding of the city's true scale. By mapping minute variations in the terrain, LiDAR is revealing the ghostly outlines of entire neighborhoods, extensive irrigation channels, and fortified farmsteads that radiate out from the capital, proving that Garama was the heart of a far more extensive and densely populated network than anyone had previously dared to imagine. Each new digital pass unveils more of this lost metropolis, suggesting that what we have excavated so far is merely the tip of a vast archaeological iceberg. These ongoing discoveries force us to completely rethink the narrative of the Sahara. This was not always a barrier separating the Mediterranean world from the African interior. For a glorious 1,000 years, the Garamantes turned it into a bridge. Their kingdom was a brilliant anomaly, a testament to human ingenuity in the face of overwhelming environmental challenges. They created a cradle of civilization in the most unlikely of places, forging a unique identity from a blend of indigenous innovation and global connections. Their eventual decline serves as a poignant reminder of the fragility of even the most advanced societies when they depend on a finite resource. The sands that now cover Garama are not just a tomb, they are a library, patiently holding the rest of their story until we develop the tools to read it. When the Kushite pharaohs were finally driven from Egypt by the Assyrian war machine, they retreated south, not in defeat, but to forge a new destiny entirely. They established a new capital at Meroë, a location that signaled a profound shift from their Egyptian-influenced past toward a future that was distinctly, powerfully African. This was not merely a change of address, it was a cultural renaissance, and Meroë would become the beating industrial heart of a kingdom reborn, a city whose full story is still emerging from the sand, piece by tantalizing piece. The first thing that would strike a visitor to ancient Meroë was the skyline. Against the flat, arid plains, a forest of steep, narrow pyramids rose dramatically, their sharp angles a defiant departure from the broader, more gentle slopes of their Egyptian predecessors. These were the tombs of Meroë's kings and queens, and they created an architectural signature that was unmistakably Kushite. But the true pulse of the city was not in its necropolises, it was in the smoky, fiery breath of its industry. Meroë sat atop enormous deposits of iron ore and was surrounded by forests that provided the necessary charcoal. The Kushites became one of the ancient world's premier iron producers, their mastery of metallurgy so complete that the city earned the modern nickname, the Birmingham of Africa. The air would have been thick with the smoke of countless furnaces, the clang of hammers on anvils a constant soundtrack. This technological prowess didn't just supply tools and weapons, it was the engine of their economy, fueling trade and projecting power across the region. Perhaps the most enduring mystery of Meroë is the voice of its people, which remains frustratingly silent to us. The Kushites developed their own writing system, known as Meroitic script. It is one of the oldest known scripts in all of Africa, with a graceful alphabetic cursive form for everyday documents and a more formal hieroglyphic version for monuments. We can sound out the words phonetically. We know how it was pronounced, but the meaning of almost all of it is lost. It is a language still waiting for its Rosetta Stone. This means that somewhere, locked within the countless inscriptions on stelae, temple walls, and pottery fragments, is the entire history of the Kingdom of Kush as they themselves wrote it, their laws, their poetry, their royal chronicles, and their personal letters. Until that key is found, we are essentially looking at this sophisticated civilization through a soundproof window, able to see their achievements but unable to hear their stories in their own words. What the archaeology does shout, however, is the immense power and influence of Meroë's women. The classical historians wrote of fearsome Kushite warrior queens known by the title Candake or Candace. These were not mere consorts or regents for young kings. They were sovereigns in their own right, ruling, leading armies, and conducting diplomacy with the power of any pharaoh. One of the most famous was Candace Ammonionas, who famously led her armies north against the Romans in Egypt after the conquest by Augustus. After initial successes, she fought the legions to a stalemate and then negotiated a highly favorable peace treaty directly with the emperor, a remarkable feat that secured Kush's borders and wealth for generations. The image of a one-eyed queen, she lost an eye in battle, dictating terms to the world's greatest superpower, is a testament to the formidable role women played at the highest levels of Meroitic power. Modern excavations are continually refining our understanding of just how advanced this society was. Archaeologists are not just uncovering more temples and tombs, they are revealing a complex urban landscape. Recent digs have unearthed the remains of vast royal palaces, their multi-room layouts and grand courtyards speaking to a sophisticated court life. Even more revealing are the extensive industrial quarters being uncovered, with workshops for weaving, pottery, and of course, iron smelting on an almost industrial scale. These findings paint a picture of a highly organized, economically diverse capital city that was a hub of production and innovation, not just a ceremonial center. Each new season of digging peels back another layer of sand, bringing us closer to understanding the daily lives of the merchants, artisans, and rulers who made Meroë a beacon of civilization in the Nubian desert. The end for Meroë came not with a bang, but with a slow, quiet fading. The combination of environmental pressure from deforestation and soil exhaustion, coupled with the economic sidelining of the Nile routes by new trade networks on the Red Sea, gradually sapped the kingdom's strength. By the 4th century of the Common Era, the once mighty capital had diminished, its power eclipsed by the rising star of Axum to the east. The furnaces grew cold, the royal court moved on, and the desert winds began their patient, centuries-long work of burying the workshops, the palaces, and the secrets of the Candakes, preserving them not for oblivion, but for a future generation that was finally ready to seek them out. Rising from the plains near the ancient capital, the stelly fields of Axum present one of archaeology's most awe-inspiring and perplexing sights. Imagine a forest of stone, not of trees, but of towering, intricately carved obelisks, some reaching for the sky, others lying broken and half swallowed by the earth. These monumental granite needles are the most enduring symbol of the kingdom's power and technical prowess, yet their exact purpose remains a subject of captivating debate. The largest of them all, the Great Stele, would have stood an incredible 33 meters tall if it had not fallen and shattered in antiquity. Just its base is estimated to weigh over 500 tons, a breathtaking scale that forces us to reconsider what an ancient African civilization was capable of achieving. The engineering involved in quarrying, transporting, and erecting these behemoths, using nothing but manpower, wooden rollers, and rope, is a staggering feat that rivals the construction of the Egyptian pyramids. Many of these giant spires are believed to have functioned as elaborate markers for underground burial chambers, acting as both a memorial and a gateway for the elite to the afterlife. The most ornate ones, like the famous stele of King Azana, are not simple monoliths. They are masterpieces of symbolic architecture. They are meticulously carved to resemble multi-story buildings, complete with false doors at their base, representing the entrance to the tomb below, and rows of intricate windows on each level. At their very peak, many feature a crescent moon and a disk, symbols that likely represent the pagan deities of the sun and moon that were worshipped in Axum before its conversion to Christianity. This architectural mimicry suggests that the stele was not just a marker but a symbolic residence for the spirit of the deceased king, a towering palace he could inhabit in the next world, reflecting his status and power for all eternity. The story of the Axum stele took a dramatic and modern turn in the 1930s when the forces of fascist Italy under Mussolini invaded Ethiopia. Following the invasion, Italian soldiers dismantled one of the most magnificent and well-preserved obelisks, a 24-meter-tall, 152-ton masterpiece, and shipped it back to Rome as a war trophy. For nearly 7 decades, this sacred monument stood in the Piazza di Porta Capena in Rome, a stark symbol of colonial plunder and a deep, open wound for the Ethiopian people. Its return became a matter of national pride and a protracted diplomatic battle. After years of negotiation and immense logistical challenges, the stele was finally returned to Axum in 2005. Its careful reassembly and re-erection in 2008 was a moment of profound national healing and a powerful restoration of a stolen piece of cultural heritage to its rightful home, standing once more amongst its brothers in the field. Today, the fields are a mix of the resurrected and the recumbent. While a few stelae have been re-erected, many more still lie where they fell centuries ago, broken into massive segments and partially buried by centuries of soil accumulation. These fallen giants are not simply waiting to be stood upright. They are actively being studied with tools the Axumite engineers could never have imagined. Archaeologists are now using ground-penetrating radar and other non-invasive technologies to scan beneath the fallen stones and the surrounding earth. These scans have revealed a hidden world below the surface, a complex network of untouched burial chambers, tunnels, and offering pits that have remained sealed for over a millennium. Each new scan promises the potential of an undisturbed royal tomb, its treasures and inscriptions perfectly preserved, holding the keys to unlocking the final secrets of the Axumite kings and the true meaning of the magnificent stone forest they planted in the Ethiopian highlands. Just a short journey north from the grand monuments of Petra, hidden within a smaller, quieter canyon known as Sik al-Barid, lies what archaeologists have nicknamed Little Petra. This was not a separate city, but rather a vital and bustling suburb of the main capital, an elegant satellite that served as a crucial gateway for the caravan trains approaching from the north. While the main Sik of Petra was a grand processional way, Sik al-Barid felt more like a bustling service entrance, a practical and vibrant district designed to handle the immense logistical flow of goods and people before they ever reached the city center. Its existence reveals a level of urban planning and economic organization that we rarely attribute to ancient societies, showing the Nabataeans weren't just brilliant engineers and artists, they were masterful administrators of a commercial empire. The canyon of Sik al-Barid is narrower and more intimate than the main Sik, and carved directly into its soft sandstone walls are the same kinds of magnificent facades, though on a slightly more humble scale. The most breathtaking of these is the Painted House, a large triclinium or dining hall. Stepping inside this chamber is like being granted a private audience with the past, thanks to the desert's incredible power of preservation. While most ancient paint has long since faded from exposure, the dry, sheltered environment of this sealed room has kept its frescoes almost miraculously intact. On the ceiling, you can still see vivid depictions of vines, grapes, flowers, and mythological figures, their colors, deep reds, blacks, and ochres still striking after 2,000 years. This wasn't just decoration, it was a deliberate artistic statement. The lush, fertile imagery of twisting vines and bursting pomegranates created a powerful illusion of an oasis paradise, a stark and comforting contrast to the harsh, arid world waiting just outside the carved doorway. These elaborately painted triclinia were far more than simple restaurants. They were the ancient equivalent of exclusive executive lounges or five-star hotel conference rooms. This is where the high-stakes business of the incense trade would have been finalized. Wealthy Nabataean merchants would host their international clients, traders from Rome, Egypt, and Arabia in these opulent halls. Guests would recline on benches carved directly into the rock, the room cooled by the natural stone, and feast while negotiating contracts for frankincense, myrrh, and silks. The lavish artwork and elaborate setting were a calculated display of wealth and cultural sophistication, a way to impress visiting dignitaries and reinforce the Nabataeans' reputation as reliable, powerful, and incredibly prosperous partners. A deal sealed here in such stunning surroundings was more than a transaction. It was an experience, cementing a business relationship built on spectacle and mutual profit. And just like in the main city, the true genius of Little Petra is hidden in its intricate water management system, engineered on a stunningly precise scale. The entire complex is riddled with a network of channels, cisterns, and reservoirs that captured every single drop of precious rainwater that fell on the surrounding plateaus. The Nabataeans even carved narrow, ritual basins directly into the floor of the canyon itself, their purpose still debated by scholars. Some believe they were used for ceremonial washing before religious feasts, while others think they were part of an elegant system for cooling wine jars for the banquets happening in the triclinia above. This micromanagement of water in what appears to be a simple way station underscores a central truth about Nabataean society. Their survival and their splendor were not gifts of nature, but the products of relentless, brilliant human innovation. Every aspect of Little Petra, from its painted ceilings to its carved water channels, speaks of a people who refused to be limited by their environment, who used their ingenuity to create a haven of commerce and culture in the most unlikely of places. While the grand narratives of Rome and Persia dominate our view of the ancient Middle East, the deserts of modern-day Iraq conceal the remains of smaller, yet equally fascinating kingdoms that thrived in the shadows of empires. Two such powers were the Kingdom of Diyala and the Kingdom of Cherasene, whose stories are not of massive armies conquering continents, but of shrewd economic adaptation and the quiet power of controlling the flow of goods and ideas. Nestled in the fertile river valley that bears its name, the Kingdom of Diyala was an ancient hub whose influence far outstripped its size. Its roots stretched back to the enigmatic Hurrian people, a civilization that flourished in the 3rd and 2nd millennia before the Common Era and left an indelible mark on the wider region. The Hurrians were not just another tribe, they were cultural conduits whose mythology and legal traditions profoundly influenced their more famous neighbors, including the Hittites. The kingdom's strategic location made it a natural crossroads, and its merchants became masters of regional trade networks, connecting the highlands of Iran with the Mesopotamian heartland. Goods like lapis lazuli, tin, and timber would have flowed through its markets, generating wealth that supported a sophisticated and distinctive culture. The most compelling window into this world is the archaeological site of Tel Agrab, where excavations in the last century revealed the stunning Shara temple. This structure was a masterpiece of early Mesopotamian architecture, complete with a remarkable collection of votive statues and the famous Tel Agrab god, a copper sculpture of a deity standing on the back of a lion, radiating a power and artistry that speaks to a highly developed religious and artistic tradition. Today, Tel Agrab and other Diyala sites are largely unexcavated mounds, silent tells holding the rest of the kingdom's secrets under the sun-baked earth, waiting for the trowel and brush to reveal the full story of this Hurrian successor state. Far to the south, where the mighty Tigris and Euphrates rivers converge and empty into the Persian Gulf, a very different kind of desert kingdom emerged centuries later. This was Characene, a realm built not on ancient temple complexes, but on the dynamism of international maritime trade. Founded around the 2nd century before the Common Era, Characene was a product of its time and place, a cosmopolitan port kingdom that acted as the essential lubricant for commerce between the Roman Empire and India. Its capital, Spasinu-Charax, was a bustling, multi-ethnic emporium where Greek sailors, Parthian officials, Arab shipbuilders, and Indian merchants would have mingled in crowded markets filled with the aromas of spices, the gleam of silk, and the chatter of a dozen languages. For the Romans, this city was the crucial last stop on the overland route before goods were loaded onto ships bound for India. For goods arriving from the east, it was the first port of entry where taxes were paid and cargo was transferred to caravans heading west. The very existence of Characene is a testament to human engineering triumphing over nature. The city was constructed on an artificial mound raised high above the marshy, flood-prone delta. Ancient historians like Pliny the Elder recorded that the founding king had to build immense earthworks to protect the city from the annual inundations of the rivers, a monumental effort that created a stable island of commerce in an otherwise unpredictable landscape. The kingdom's wealth allowed it to mint its own extensive coinage, which provides us with the faces and names of its otherwise obscure kings, many of whom had to perform a delicate diplomatic dance. For much of its history, Characene was a semi-independent vassal of the powerful Parthian Empire, but its economic importance gave its rulers significant leverage. They often acted with a great deal of autonomy, and at times even flirted with alliances with Rome, the Parthians' great rival, playing the two superpowers off each other to maintain their own profitable neutrality and keep the trade routes open. The fate of both Diyala and Characene was ultimately sealed by the same forces that created them, the shifting paths of water and commerce. For Diyala, changes in river courses and the rise and fall of regional empires gradually eroded its economic importance, leaving its cities to be abandoned and slowly buried by silt and sand. For Characene, the slow silting up of the Tigris-Euphrates delta, a process that continues to this day, eventually strangled its lifeblood. The waterways that made Spasinu-Charax a thriving port gradually became unnavigable for large ships, pushing major trade to other routes and ports. The city was eventually abandoned, and its precise location was lost for centuries. Its mighty artificial mound now just one more feature in the flat, featureless landscape of southern Iraq. Modern scholars believe they have identified its site, but like Tel Agrab, it remains largely unexcavated, a buried treasure chest of potential knowledge about the intricate web of trade and culture that once connected the entire ancient world through these forgotten desert gateways. While the grand empires of the Nile and Mesopotamia commanded vast territories, the true lifeblood of long-distance trade often pulsed through much smaller, yet critically important, hubs, the great oasis cities of the Arabian Peninsula. These were not kingdoms of endless farmland or huge armies, but rather sophisticated city-states that mastered the art of survival and commerce in an utterly hostile environment. Their power was not measured in square miles conquered, but in their absolute control over the precious resources of water, shelter, and security along the desert routes. Three of the most significant of these were Tema, Dedan, and Duma, names that once echoed in the caravanserais but were slowly silenced by the shifting sands of time and trade. In the barren expanse of northwestern Saudi Arabia, Tema stands as a testament to the wealth that water could create in the desert. This was not a minor watering hole. It was a major political and economic center, famous for its massive defensive walls, sections of which still stand today, and its incredibly deep well, which provided a reliable water source for millennia. Tema's importance is etched into history by its mention in the Hebrew Bible, associated with the Babylonian king Nabonidus, who shocked his contemporaries by choosing to reside there for a decade, effectively making it the seat of his empire. This wasn't a whimsical decision, it was a strategic move to control the lucrative trade routes. Tema grew wealthy from the trade in frankincense, but also from something far more tangible: salt. The nearby Sabkat Tema, a massive salt flat, provided a vital commodity that was mined and traded across the region. The city's inhabitants left behind a wealth of inscriptions, not just in Aramaic and other regional languages, but in a unique local script, suggesting a distinct cultural identity forged at the crossroads of empires. Tema's decline was a slow process, tied to the gradual drying of the climate and the slow but steady shift in trade routes toward maritime paths. The sands that once threatened its existence ironically became its preserver, burying its lower towns and protecting its secrets until modern excavations began to reveal the full scale of this desert metropolis. A short journey south from Tema brings us to the breathtaking oasis of Al-Ula, the ancient site of Dedan. If Tema was a fortress of trade, Dedan was a capital of culture and cryptic script. This was the heartland of the Lihianite and later the Dedanite kingdoms, civilizations that rose to prominence around the first millennium before the Common Era. The most striking legacy of the Lihianites is not grand architecture, but the thousands of inscriptions they carved into the surrounding cliff faces. These are not simple graffiti, they are formal dedications, legal texts and prayers written in a distinct script that is a precursor to the Arabic alphabet. Walking through the canyon today is like walking through an open-air library of stone, every rock face telling a story. The Lihianites were master sculptors as well, carving monumental statues of their kings and lions directly into the rock, projecting their power and piety to all who passed through. Dedan's strategic location made it a vital stop on the incense route, a place where caravans could rest and resupply before the perilous journey north. Its decline mirrored that of its neighbors as the fall in demand for incense and the rerouting of trade starved the city of its economic purpose. For centuries, the magnificent tombs and inscriptions of Dedan were known only to local Bedouin tribes, a forgotten capital waiting for the world to remember its name. Completing this trio of desert powerhouses is Duma, known today as Dumat al-Jandal. Its name, meaning Duma of the Stone, hints at its rugged, fortified nature. Located at a crucial node where trade routes from Mesopotamia, Arabia, and the Levant converged, Duma was a prize coveted by many. It fell under the sphere of influence of the Nabataeans, who undoubtedly valued its strategic position for controlling the northern reaches of their commercial network. The most iconic surviving structure from this era is the Casa Marid, a formidable fortress whose core Nabataean masonry was later built upon by Romans, Byzantines, and early Muslims, creating a literal layers of history in stone. With the dawn of the Islamic era, Duma's importance was renewed. It was conquered by the Muslim armies in the 7th century, and the Caliph Umar ibn al-Khattab ordered the construction of the Oman Mosque, one of the very oldest in all of Islam, which still stands today adjacent to the ancient fort. Duma's story is therefore one of remarkable continuity, a place that managed to remain relevant across millennia by adapting to new political and religious realities. Its final fade into obscurity was more gradual than abrupt, a slow dwindling as the desert's grip tightened, and the great age of the caravan gave way to new forms of transport and communication. The modern story of these oasis kingdoms is one of spectacular rediscovery. For centuries, they were little more than names in old texts and vague ruins on the horizon. Today, they are at the heart of one of the most ambitious archaeological and cultural projects on Earth, the development of Al-Ula. This vast undertaking is using the latest technology, including satellite imagery and LiDAR scanning, to map the entire region in unprecedented detail, revealing thousands of previously undocumented archaeological sites. The work is not just about uncovering the past, it's about meticulously preserving it and making it accessible. the recent opening of sites like Hegra, Saudi Arabia's first UNESCO World Heritage Site, has pulled back the curtain on a world that was literally hidden in plain sight. As conservators gently clear sand from ancient Dedanite tombs and archaeologists decipher newly found Lihianite inscriptions, we are gaining a profound new understanding of Arabian history. These were not barren wastelands between empires. They were the vibrant, innovative, and powerful centers of their own worlds, whose legacy, once buried by sand and time, is now finally being revealed in all its complexity. Yet for all the tantalizing clues, Yam itself remains stubbornly invisible. Modern archaeologists have scoured the suggested regions, the deserts of northern Chad, the Libyan plateau of Jebel Uweinat, even the remote corners of Sudan, and found nothing that definitively matches the description of a powerful, centralized kingdom. This absence has led some to question its very existence, proposing that Yam might have been an elaborate invention, a kind of promotional myth the Egyptians told to inflate the value of their own expeditions and the rarity of the goods they brought back. Perhaps, they suggest, Yam was not a single kingdom at all, but a collective term for a series of smaller, nomadic tribal territories that the Egyptians lumped together under one grand, exotic name. The most compelling theory, however, and the one that best explains the complete lack of physical evidence, points to the relentless enemy we have seen claim so many other desert kingdoms: climate change. During the time of Harkhuf, around 4,300 years ago, the Sahara was in the final stages of a dramatic transformation. Rock art from Jebel Uweinat and other now barren locations shows a completely different world. A green Sahara filled with giraffes, elephants, and lakes, a land capable of supporting large, settled populations. As the planet's climate shifted, the rains failed, and the desert began its inexorable advance. Lush savannas turned to dust, rivers vanished underground, and any kingdom that once stood in these regions would have been utterly consumed. The people of Yam, if they existed, would have been forced to abandon their homes and become the nomadic tribes we now know as the Tuareg or other Berber groups, their settled history completely erased by the dunes. Their cities, built perhaps of mud brick rather than stone, would have melted back into the earth, leaving no trace for Harkhuf's modern counterparts to find. Yam, therefore, stands as one of archaeology's most profound and enduring mysteries, a powerful reminder that some kingdoms aren't just buried by sand, but were so completely scoured from the earth by a changing world that they have been reduced to a whisper in a tomb, a ghost in the desert that we can almost but never quite reach. Yet while the Egyptians left us a detailed portrait of what they received from Punt, they were curiously vague about its precise location, referring to it simply as being to the south and accessible by sea. This deliberate ambiguity has sparked one of the most enduring and heated debates in archaeology. For over a century, scholars have put forward a variety of compelling theories, each with its own supporting evidence. One major school of thought places Punt in the Horn of Africa, specifically in modern-day Eritrea or Somalia. This theory is bolstered by the types of goods acquired. The ebony, ivory, and aromatic resins like myrrh and frankincense are all native to this region. Furthermore, the depictions of the Puntites themselves, with their distinctive features and the tropical animals shown, strongly suggest an African location. The nearby coastal plains and the ancient port of Adulis, which later became a major Axumite trading hub, are often cited as a potential candidate for the lost entrepot. Another persuasive argument locates Punt across the Red Sea, in the southwestern corner of the Arabian Peninsula, in what is now Yemen. Proponents of this theory point to the maritime capabilities of the Egyptians, suggesting a journey down the Gulf of Suez and across the narrow Strait of Bab el-Mandeb was more feasible than a long voyage down the entire African coast. They also highlight the ancient and sophisticated cultures that existed in Yemen, like those of the Menians and Sabaeans, who were renowned for their production of frankincense. It is entirely possible and perhaps even likely that the Egyptian term Punt did not refer to a single, centralized kingdom with a fixed capital, but rather to a wider cultural and economic zone spanning both sides of the southern Red Sea. The Puntites may have been a confederation of merchants and chieftains who controlled the flow of high-value goods from the African interior to the Arabian coast, acting as the indispensable middlemen in a vast and lucrative network. So why, after all this time and with such detailed records, have we failed to find the smoking gun, the definitive ruins of a Puntite city that we can point to without question? The answer likely lies in the dynamic and often destructive power of coastal geology. Unlike the stone monuments of Egypt, which were built to last for eternity in a dry, stable environment, the ports and trading posts of Punt were almost certainly constructed from more perishable materials: wood, wattle, daub, and coral rag. Built right on the shoreline to facilitate trade, these settlements would have been extremely vulnerable to changes in sea level, coastal erosion, and the shifting silt deposits from river deltas over the past 3.5 millennia. A port that was thriving and accessible in the 15th century before the Common Era could have been completely submerged, silted over, or eroded away long ago, its remains now lying underwater on the continental shelf or buried deep beneath layers of sediment. Compounding this issue is the relentless advance of desertification in both the proposed regions. In the Horn of Africa, climate shifts have caused previously fertile coastal plains to dry up and be buried under sand dunes. Inland areas that once supported the dense forests needed for ebony and the groves of frankincense trees may have become barren, their ruins hidden under meters of wind-blown sand. The very success of the Puntite economy might have also contributed to its eventual disappearance. The high demand for its exotic goods could have led to overexploitation, the clearing of forests for ebony and the overtapping of frankincense trees, degrading the local environment and making it increasingly difficult to sustain large, centralized populations. Without a clear capital city of stone to discover, archaeologists are left searching for subtle clues: pottery shards with unique designs, ancient trash heaps, middens containing the remains of tropical goods, or inscriptions in a yet-to-be-deciphered script that might finally give the Puntites a voice of their own. The Kingdom of Punt, therefore, remains archaeology's most tantalizing will-o'-the-wisp. It is a civilization we know almost entirely through the eyes of its customers, a vibrant and crucial partner that shaped the economy and religion of ancient Egypt, yet managed to vanish without leaving a single undeniable ruin for us to find. Its enduring mystery is a powerful lesson in the fragility of history, especially for cultures built on trade and located in environmentally volatile zones. The sands and seas that once carried the ships of Hatshepsut's envoys have now closed over the land of gods, guarding its secrets until a lucky discovery or a new technology finally allows us to walk its fragrant shores once more. Herodotus, the ancient Greek historian often called the father of history, filled his chronicles with tales of both fact and fantastical rumor. Among his most intriguing accounts is that of the Macrobians, a people he placed somewhere in the distant and mysterious Horn of Africa. According to his writings, gathered from travelers' whispers and sailors' yarns, the Macrobians were a race of giants, remarkably tall and living to extraordinary ages, a claim that earned them their name, which literally means the long-lived. He described their homeland as stretching towards the ocean, a description that has led many modern scholars to tentatively place them in what is now Somalia. This was a kingdom shrouded in the fog of legend, a place where reality seemed to blur with the edges of the known world. Their purported wealth was the stuff of ancient dreams. Herodotus tells a story of the Persian emperor Cambyses, who, upon conquering Egypt, sent envoys to the Macrobians with gifts he thought would demonstrate his power and sophistication. He sent them a precious load of purple dye, a golden necklace, and a special wine. The Macrobian king, utterly unimpressed, responded with a challenge. He asked if the Persians lived on nothing but this dried plant, this metal, and this drink, pointing out the impracticality of such luxuries for survival. To demonstrate true wealth, he presented his own gift, a powerful bow. He told the Persian messengers that when their king could draw this bow with ease, only then should he consider making war on the Maccabeans. Until then, he should be thankful the Maccabeans had no designs on his empire. This clever anecdote wasn't just about pride, it was a lesson in values, suggesting the Maccabeans prized practical strength and self-sufficiency over the superficial trappings of imported luxury. Perhaps the most bizarre and memorable detail Herodotus provides concerns their burial customs. He claimed the Maccabeans practiced a form of mummification utterly unique in the ancient world. When a member of their community died, they would not bury the body immediately. Instead, they would first encase it in a hollow, transparent crystal or a type of exceptionally clear plaster. This substance was shaped to perfectly fit the deceased's body, creating a lifelike, statuesque shell that allowed the face and form to remain visible. These crystal cocoons were then be placed upright inside their homes, kept alongside the living for a full year. The family would make offerings of food and wine to their entombed ancestor throughout this period. Only after this prolonged vigil would the crystal-encased body be finally laid to rest in the earth, standing upright in a circle of other such memorials. This practice, if true, speaks to a profound and intimate relationship with death, one that kept the physical presence of the departed deeply integrated within the daily life of the community for an extended time. The central, frustrating problem with the Kingdom of Macrobea is that it exists solely within the pages of Herodotus. Despite decades of archaeological exploration across Somalia and the surrounding regions, no physical evidence has ever been uncovered that can be definitively linked to his description. No crystal-encased mummies have been found standing in silent circles. No grand cities or unique artifacts matching his account have emerged from the sand. This complete lack of corroborating evidence leaves historians and archaeologists in a difficult position. Some believe the Maccabeans were a real but heavily exaggerated culture. Herodotus was known to rely on second- and third-hand accounts, and the details may have been distorted as the story traveled across the desert and over the seas. The crystal sarcophagi, for instance, could have been a misunderstanding of a practice using polished gypsum or another locally available translucent mineral. The modern reality of the Horn of Africa also presents a formidable barrier to discovery. For decades, the region has been plagued by intense political instability, prolonged conflict, and a lack of infrastructure. These conditions make organized, large-scale archaeological fieldwork extremely dangerous and often impossible. Vast stretches of potential territory remain completely unexplored by scientists, their secrets guarded not just by sand but by the turmoil of the present. Furthermore, the environment itself is an adversary. The climate is harsh and unforgiving, and the landscape has undergone significant changes over the past 2.5 millennia. Coastal erosion, desertification, and the shifting sands of the Somali desert may have long since buried any remnants of a Maccabean settlement far deeper than any surface survey could hope to find. Ultimately, the Kingdom of Macrobea occupies a captivating space in the study of forgotten kingdoms. It stands as a powerful symbol of the limits of our knowledge, a reminder that some ancient civilizations may be lost to us not because they were unimportant, but because the fragile evidence of their existence has been erased by time, climate, and human conflict. It represents the tantalizing gap between historical text and archaeological proof. For now, Macrobea remains a ghost in the historical record, a civilization of towering, long-lived people and their crystalline dead, waiting silently under the Somali sun for a future generation of explorers to finally separate the incredible truth from the enduring legend. While the story of Ubar reveals a city lost to geological catastrophe, another legendary kingdom haunts the pre-Islamic history of Arabia, a civilization whose tale is one of towering pride and divine punishment. This is the story of the people of Letter 2 BF a powerful tribe said to have been the founders of a magnificent city known as Aram of the Pillars, a place of such grandeur and sin that it was erased from the earth by the will of God, leaving behind only whispers in the wind and a mystery that has tantalized explorers and scholars for over a millennium. The primary source for this lost kingdom is the Quran, where their story serves as a powerful moral lesson. According to these teachings, the people of Letter 2 BF were a race of giants, granted immense strength and prosperity by God. They built a magnificent city with towering, ornate pillars, a testament to their unparalleled architectural skill and their earthly power. Yet with this power came an overwhelming arrogance. They turned away from the one God to worship idols, and they grew cruel and tyrannical, believing their mighty constructions made them invincible. God sent a prophet, Hud, to them, urging them to abandon their wicked ways and return to righteousness. But the people of Letter 2 BF mocked Hud, challenging him to bring down the punishment he threatened. Their defiance sealed their fate. The Quran describes how a terrible, relentless drought struck their land for 7 years, turning their paradise into a barren wasteland. Then, as they gathered in anticipation of a promised rain cloud that would end their suffering, they saw a dark smudge on the horizon. But this was no bringer of life-giving water. It was a cataclysmic, divinely sent sandstorm that engulfed their city for 7 nights and 8 days. The wind, described as a roaring, unstoppable force, scoured the stone pillars from the earth and obliterated every last trace of the people of Letter 2 BF wiping them from existence as if they had never been. The city of Aram, with its lofty pillars, was swallowed whole by the desert, becoming the ultimate symbol of hubris laid low. For centuries, Western scholars dismissed Aram as a purely mythological place, a cautionary fable with no basis in historical fact. The turning point came with the discovery of the real Ubar, which sparked a fascinating debate. Were Ubar and Aram one and the same? The connection is compelling. Both are fabulously wealthy cities of the frankincense trade. Both were located in the remote deserts of the Arabian Peninsula, and both met a sudden, catastrophic end that led to their complete disappearance. Some researchers and popular writers have enthusiastically linked the two, suggesting that the legendary Aram of the Pillars was the religious or poetic name for the commercial hub the Romans called Ubar. The massive, collapsed cavern found at Ubar could easily be woven into the Quranic narrative of a city being swallowed or destroyed by the earth. However, many historians and archaeologists urge caution, pointing out that the descriptions, while similar, are not identical. The Quran's specific emphasis on Aram's lofty pillars is a unique detail not associated with Ubar's remains. It is entirely possible that Aram and Ubar were two distinct, yet equally real lost cities, their stories merging over centuries of oral tradition. The search for Aram has been the stuff of romantic obsession, most famously pursued by British explorer Bertram Thomas in the early 1930s. While crossing the terrifyingly vast Rub al-Khali, or empty quarter, his Bedouin guide spoke in hushed tones of a lost city of their ancestors, which they called Ubar. They recounted legends of a great king who, in his arrogance, built a magnificent paradise in the desert, only to have the sands open up and consume it as punishment for his sins. Thomas was captivated, but he died before he could mount a full expedition. His notes, however, inspired a later generation of explorers, including Nicholas Clapp, who would later use satellite imagery to pinpoint the site now identified as Ubar. The enduring Bedouin legends are a crucial thread in this mystery, a continuous oral history passed down for thousands of years that keeps the memory of a lost golden age alive. For them, the desert is not empty, it is a graveyard of civilizations, and its shifting dunes are both the shroud and the guardian of their deepest secrets. The true location of Aram, if it exists as a distinct entity from Ubar, remains one of the great unsolved enigmas of archaeology. The empty quarter is one of the most extreme and inaccessible environments on the planet, a sea of sand dunes that can shift dramatically with each storm, hiding and revealing landscapes in a perpetual slow-motion dance. Any ruins would be buried under countless meters of sand, invisible to surface surveys and incredibly difficult to detect even with the most advanced technology like ground-penetrating radar, which struggles with the properties of dry sand. The desert itself is the perfect preserver and the perfect obscurer. It protects what it buries from erosion and looting, but it also hides it from our curious eyes with an efficiency that stone jungles or moist climates never could. The search continues, with modern archaeologists using ever more sophisticated satellite data to look for ancient camel tracks and subtle geological anomalies that might point the way, but the scale of the task is monumental. Iram stands as a powerful duality, a vivid, detailed legend that feels utterly real, and a physical reality that remains utterly elusive, a ghost city whose sands have yet to yield their final, definitive secret. But what happened after the final Kushite pharaohs were driven from Egypt? The story doesn't end with their retreat. It simply enters a new and even more fascinating chapter of cultural rebirth. While the Grand Pyramids of Meroë capture the imagination, it's a sight just a stone's throw from the old Kerma capital that is now completely rewriting our understanding of this powerful African kingdom. For decades, the ancient city of Kerma itself has been the star of the show, with its massive mud brick tefufas and sprawling cemeteries. But recent excavations at a nearby site known as Dauki Gel, meaning the Red Mound, are revealing a parallel city that is far stranger and in many ways more revealing. This isn't just another neighborhood, it's a sprawling ceremonial and political center that exposes the incredibly complex and often surprising relationship between Kerma and its famous northern rival, Egypt. The first clue that Dauki Gel was something extraordinary came when archaeologists, led by teams from the University of Nuchetal, began to uncover structures that defied all known architectural traditions in Nubia. Instead of the expected square or rectangular foundations, they found themselves mapping a series of perfectly circular buildings. These weren't simple huts, they were large, sophisticated structures with wooden columns supporting their roofs, arranged in a precise, intentional pattern. This was an architecture of circles and curves, a stark departure from the angular, Egyptian-influenced designs found elsewhere. The purpose of these unique buildings remains a subject of intense debate. Some researchers believe they were grand reception halls or ceremonial spaces for Kushite royalty, designed specifically to host important rituals that were distinctly African in origin, separate from the cultural sway of Egypt. The circular form may have held deep spiritual significance, representing the sun, the moon, or the cyclical nature of life and kingship in a way that rectangular temples did not. Then the plot thickened dramatically. As the teams dug deeper, they made a discovery that no one had anticipated. Directly on top of the leveled remains of these circular Kushite buildings, they found the unmistakable foundations of a completely different kind of structure, a massive Egyptian fort. This was no mere outpost. This was a formidable military installation built in a classic Egyptian style, complete with magazines for storing supplies, barracks for soldiers, and a commanding headquarters. This physical evidence aligns perfectly with a famous ancient text. An inscription by the Egyptian pharaoh Thutmose I boasts of his victory over Kush, stating, "I have made a slaughter among them. I have overthrown their towns, set fire to their homes, and made piles of their corpses." The archaeological record at Dauki Gel brings this brutal bragging to life. It appears that after his conquest, Thutmose I deliberately and symbolically built his victory fortress directly atop the ritually significant ruins of the Kushite ceremonial center, a profound act of domination meant to erase their spiritual heart and stamp Egyptian authority over the land. But the story of this site gets even more complex, revealing a relationship that was far more nuanced than simple conqueror and conquered. In later periods, long after the initial conquest, the Egyptians didn't just occupy Dawki Gel, they rebuilt it and seemingly coexisted with it. Evidence points to a later pharaoh, perhaps the great builder Amenhotep III, actually reconstructing the very Kushite ceremonial buildings his predecessors had destroyed. This astonishing act suggests a fascinating shift in strategy. Instead of pure suppression, a later Egyptian administration may have sought to legitimize its rule by adopting and assimilating local Kushite religious practices, effectively saying, "We respect your gods and now we will worship them with you." This wasn't just tolerance, it was a shrewd political move to secure the loyalty of a population whose culture they could not simply erase. Dawki Gel thus becomes a palimpsest, a single site where layers of conflict, destruction, occupation, and finally, a tense cultural fusion are all physically stacked one on top of the other, telling a 1,000-year story in a single acre of sand. The most recent and electrifying finds at Dawki Gel are a series of pit-style graves containing the remains of dozens of horses. This in itself was not entirely unexpected, as horses were symbols of status and power. However, analysis of the bones revealed these were not ordinary steeds. They were large, powerful animals carefully bred and evidently well cared. More astonishingly, they were found buried in pairs, with their legs carefully arranged as if they had been sacrificed and interred as a team, perhaps still harnessed to a chariot. This discovery opens up a thrilling possibility. Could these be the remains of the very chariot horses that formed the elite core of the Kushite army, the formidable force that once pushed north and even challenged the Egyptians on their own turf? The careful, respectful burial suggests these animals were incredibly valuable, not just as military assets, but as revered companions in life and potent symbols in death. Their presence at a major ceremonial center like Dawki Gel indicates that the relationship between the Kushites and Egyptians wasn't just about cultural exchange. It was also a fierce military rivalry where advanced technology, like the chariot, played a critical role on both sides. What the ongoing work at Dawki Gel ultimately teaches us is that the history of these two great civilizations cannot be written as a simple narrative of Egyptian dominance. It was a dynamic, often violent, but endlessly creative dialogue. The site acts as a microscopic lens focusing on the grander story of the entire region. Each season of digging peels back another layer, revealing that for every Egyptian fort, there is a Kushite temple beneath it. For every pharaonic inscription claiming total victory, there is archaeological evidence of resilient local traditions that endured, adapted, and ultimately influenced the conquerors. The sands of northern Sudan have proven to be an almost infinite archive. The excavations at Dawki Gel are a powerful reminder that we have only just begun to scratch the surface. For every answer the trowel uncovers, it asks a dozen new questions, guaranteeing that the lost kingdoms of the desert will continue to surprise and enthrall us for generations to come. While the Nabataeans rightfully claim fame for their rock-carved wonder of Petra, their dominance was built upon a foundation laid by an earlier and equally formidable power. Before the rose-red city ever echoed with the chatter of merchants, the incense trade was commanded by the Kingdom of Lihian, a civilization that transformed the oasis of deadened modern-day Al-Ula into a thriving capital of commerce and culture. This was not some minor tribal confederation. The Lihianites established a sophisticated state whose influence reached across the Arabian Peninsula, mastering the logistics of luxury long before Petra's architects ever drew a plan. The lifeblood of Lihian's power was its absolute control over the flow of frankincense and myrrh. Caravans laden with these priceless resins, harvested from trees in distant southern Arabia, were funneled through the Lihianite heartland. At Dedan, they would rest, resupply, and pay taxes to the Lihianite kings, who ensured safe passage along the perilous northern routes toward the markets of Egypt, Mesopotamia, and the emerging Greco-Roman world. This strategic chokehold on the ancient world's most valuable commodity generated immense wealth, which the Lyhianites poured into their capital, creating a city of temples, workshops, and bustling markets that became a legend in its own time. The most striking legacy of this forgotten kingdom isn't found in crumbling walls, but in the sheer faces of the surrounding sandstone cliffs. The Lyhianites were prolific writers, carving thousands of inscriptions into the rock of formal dedications, legal texts, and prayers, using a distinct, graceful script that is a direct precursor to the Arabic alphabet. Walking through the canyons around Al-Ula is like walking through an open-air library of stone, every surface a potential page telling a story of trade, religion, or law. But they were master artists as well as scribes. They carved monumental statues directly into the cliff faces, creating towering depictions of their kings and deities, often shown with a powerful, stoic presence. One of the most famous is the monolithic lion tomb, guarded by two carved lions, symbolizing strength and sovereignty. These sculptures were not mere decorations. They were a permanent, public projection of Lyhianite power and piety, designed to awe every trader and traveler who passed through their domain. Despite their sophistication, the kingdom of Lyhian eventually faded from prominence. The reasons were likely a combination of shifting economic currents and the rise of ambitious rivals. As the Nabataeans grew in power to the north, they began to aggressively compete for control over the trade routes, eventually muscling out the Lyhianites and redirecting the flow of wealth toward Petra. A change in climate, leading to increased aridity, may have also put pressure on the agricultural base that supported Dedan's population. Over centuries, the city's importance dwindled, its grand statues were abandoned, and the relentless desert winds began to blow sand through its streets, silently burying the capital under layers of dust and time. For over 2 millennia, the story of Lyhian remained half-told, known only from these scattered inscriptions and the ruins of a few tombs. Its full scale and significance were hidden, quite literally, beneath the sand. That is, until very recently. The entire region of Al-Ula is now the focus of one of the most ambitious archaeological and cultural projects on the planet. Teams of international experts armed with drone technology, satellite imagery, and ground-penetrating radar are meticulously surveying the area, revealing thousands of previously undocumented sites. The sand is being carefully cleared from ancient tombs, and new excavations are uncovering the extensive remains of Dedan itself, its residential quarters, its industrial zones, and its temples. This isn't just an academic exercise, it's a full-scale renaissance with the goal of preserving this unparalleled heritage and making it accessible to the world. The recent opening of the site to controlled tourism is pulling back the curtain on a lost world, proving that the deserts of Arabia were never empty wastelands, but the vibrant, beating heart of powerful kingdoms whose stories are only now being fully unearthed. While the story of the Garamantes shows us a civilization mastering the Sahara with hydrological genius, and Lyhian reveals the precursors to Nabataean trade dominance, our journey now takes us to a different kind of desert crossroads, one defined not by sand dunes, but by the fierce political and spiritual currents of the ancient world. Tucked into the arid plains of Upper Mesopotamia, in what is now southeastern Turkey, the Kingdom of Osroene carved out a unique and influential identity for itself, becoming a crucial buffer state and an astonishingly early beacon of a New World religion. This was not a kingdom of vast territorial conquest, but rather a nimble and culturally rich polity whose capital, Edessa, would become a name whispered with reverence in the history of Christianity. Osroene's story begins with its strategic and perpetually precarious geography. Its capital, Edessa, modern-day Şanlıurfa, was situated directly on the seam between two superpowers, the Roman Empire to the west and the Parthian Empire to the east. For centuries, this made the kingdom a perpetual pawn in a grand geopolitical game, a coveted prize that both giants sought to control. The kings of Osroene became masters of survival diplomacy, expertly switching allegiances between Rome and Parthia to maintain their autonomy. They were not mere subjects, they were savvy players who understood their value as a buffer zone. A Roman historian even recorded that the Parthians respected their independence so much that they refused to depose an Osroenian king, even when asked by his own rebellious sons, valuing a stable, friendly neighbor over the chaos of a coup. This delicate balancing act allowed Osroene to flourish for nearly 4 centuries as an independent Aramaic-speaking state, a remarkable feat of political endurance in such a volatile neighborhood. But the kingdom's most profound and lasting legacy was not its diplomacy, it was its faith. Edessa earned the title of the Blessed City for a powerful reason. According to ancient Christian tradition, it became the first kingdom in history to officially adopt Christianity as a state religion. The story centers on its king, Abgar-V, who reigned during the time of Jesus. The legend, preserved by the church historian Eusebius, tells of King Abgar, who was suffering from a terrible illness. Hearing of the miracles of Jesus, he sent a letter to him, pleading for a visit and healing. Jesus reportedly sent back a reply, blessing the city and promising to send one of his disciples after his ascension. That disciple, Addai, eventually came to Edessa, healed the king, and converted the population. While historians debate the literal accuracy of this story, its cultural impact is undeniable. It firmly established Edessa's reputation as a sovereign Christian state decades before Constantine legalized the religion in the Roman Empire, making it a place of immense pilgrimage and theological importance. This early adoption fostered an incredible flourishing of Syriac culture. Syriac, a dialect of Aramaic, became the language of the court, the street, and the church. Edessa transformed into the intellectual engine of the early Syriac-speaking Christian world. Its schools became renowned centers of learning, where scholars meticulously translated Greek philosophical and theological works into Syriac. This was not merely a literary exercise, it was an act of profound preservation. When the Greek-speaking world later plunged into periods of turmoil, many ancient texts were lost in their original language. It was often through these Syriac translations, meticulously copied by monks in desert monasteries, that these works survived to be later retranslated into Arabic and Latin, thereby saving a vast repository of classical knowledge for posterity. The kingdom was a living library, a hub where the wisdom of the Greco-Roman world was absorbed, synthesized, and passed on through a distinct Syriac Christian lens. Yet, for all its spiritual and cultural significance, the physical remains of the Kingdom of Osroene present a frustratingly incomplete picture. The urban center of Şanlıurfa still thrives today, its modern buildings sitting directly atop the ancient city, making large-scale archaeological excavation nearly impossible. We catch glimpses of its past glory in surviving monuments like the majestic pools of Sacred Carp and the legendary cave said to be the birthplace of the prophet Abraham, sites that have been venerated for millennia. The real mystery, however, lies not in the city, but in the vast rural hinterlands that once supported the kingdom. The same climate shifts that contributed to the fall of other desert civilizations also affected this region. Gradual desertification and centuries of agricultural decline meant countless small villages, fortresses, and monasteries were simply abandoned and left to the mercy of the elements. Today, these sites lie buried and utterly forgotten under layers of wind-blown dust and soil. Unlike the monumental ruins of Petra or Palmyra, these were not grand cities of stone. They were communities built from mud brick, a material that, when abandoned, melts back into the earth with heartbreaking efficiency. Satellite imagery and surveys suggest there are hundreds, perhaps thousands, of these unexcavated mounds scattered across the plains, each one a potential time capsule of everyday life in this pivotal kingdom. They hold the stories of the common people, the farmers, the soldiers, the merchants, and the monks whose lives defined Osrhoene far more than the occasional royal decree. The very dust that has sealed them away for centuries is also what has preserved them, protecting fragile organic materials and fragile manuscripts that would have long since vanished in a wetter climate. The Kingdom of Osrhoene, therefore, remains a tale of two cities, the celebrated spiritual capital whose story is well documented in texts, and the silent, buried countryside whose secrets are still waiting for the archaeologist's trowel to give them a voice. Yet as we move from the Mediterranean-facing kingdoms to the heart of the African continent, a different kind of power was beginning to stir, one whose roots were not in stone monuments or written scripture, but in the fertile, life-giving mud of a great river. Long before the Ghana Empire rose to legendary wealth, the Sahel, that vast, semi-arid belt between the Sahara and the Savannah, was already nurturing sophisticated urban societies. Two of the earliest and most enigmatic are known to us only through fleeting mentions and the silent, patient work of archaeology, the kingdoms the Arab geographers called Wawa and Ghana. The very names are ghostly echoes. Arab chroniclers like al-Bakri and al-Idrisi, writing centuries after these states had already faded, recorded names and places from even older oral traditions. They spoke of a land of wealth beyond the desert, a place where gold seemed to grow like carrots and was harvested at sunrise. Among these early realms were Wawa and a kingdom called Ghana, a name not to be confused with the later, much larger Ghana Empire that would adopt its title. This original Ghana, along with its neighbor Wawa, represents the foundational layer of West African statecraft, the first experiments in urban living and complex society in the Niger River region. Their stories are not written on parchment or carved in stone, but are instead buried under the very soil that gave them life, waiting for modern science to piece together their incredible beginnings. The key to unlocking this mystery lies in a place now known as Djenné Djinno, an ancient mound of earth rising from the inundation plains of the inland Niger Delta in modern-day Mali. For centuries, locals knew this was an old place, but its true significance was completely unrecognized. It wasn't until the 1970s, with the pioneering work of archaeologists like Roderick and Susan McIntosh, that Djenné Djinno was revealed to be one of the oldest and most important cities in sub-Saharan Africa. The findings there were nothing short of revolutionary. Contrary to the long-held belief that urbanism in Africa was dependent on outside influence or trade with the Mediterranean, Djenné Djinno proved that a large, complex, and indigenous city had risen entirely on its own terms from the rich banks of the Niger. What made Djenné Djinno and its surrounding sister cities so special was their unique environment. The inland Niger Delta is a vast seasonal wetland. Every year, the river would flood, spreading a layer of incredibly fertile silt across the land. This annual gift of mud created an agricultural paradise in the middle of the Sahel, capable of supporting massive harvests of rice, millet, and sorghum. The people of this region learned to master this rhythm of flood and retreat, building their settlements on large man-made mounds to stay above the waterline. This agricultural surplus was the essential fuel for urbanization. It allowed for a population that was not solely dedicated to farming. It supported specialists, potters, ironworkers, weavers, and traders who could live together in a densely packed community. Djenné Djinno was not a city of kings and monuments, but a city of artisans and merchants, a bustling, egalitarian hub that flourished for over 1,600 years without walls, without a standing army, and without any evidence of a centralized, tyrannical ruler. This is where the tantalizing connection to the kingdoms of Wawa and Ghana comes into play. The archaeological record shows that by the 4th century of the Common Era, Djenné Djinno was a major population center, surrounded by a cluster of smaller, specialized settlements. One town might have focused on iron smelting, another on fishing, and another on rice cultivation. they were connected by a web of economic interdependence, trading their goods with one another in a sophisticated local network. Many historians and archaeologists now posit that this urban cluster, with Janae Gino at its heart, was the physical manifestation of the kingdom the early Arab writers called Ghana. It wasn't an empire in the traditional sense, but a confederation of cities, a collective power that derived its strength from cooperation and specialized production rather than conquest. So what became of these first cities? Their disappearance is a story written in mud and sand. The same environmental processes that built them also hid them. The annual floods of the Niger continue to deposit their layers of silt season after season, century after century. When a house collapsed or a neighborhood was abandoned, the wind would blow desert sand over the ruins, and the next flood would seal it with a new layer of mud. This relentless, gentle process slowly buried the earliest phases of Janae Gino and its sister cities under meters of earth. What looks like a simple, grassy mound to the naked eye is actually a layer cake of history, with the oldest foundations lying deep beneath the surface, protected and preserved by the very sediment that concealed them. This is why the archaeology of this region is so challenging and so thrilling. Uncovering these sites requires meticulous, slow excavation through compacted mud and sand. There are no towering stone walls to guide the way, only subtle changes in soil color and density. But the rewards are immense because the sites have been sealed for centuries in anaerobic, waterlogged conditions. Organic materials that would have vanished anywhere else are perfectly preserved here. Archaeologists have uncovered ancient wooden tools, delicate fish bones, seeds, and even the imprints of woven textiles, incredibly rare finds that give us an intimate window into the daily lives of these early urban dwellers. Each handful of dirt sifted from these mounds has the potential to rewrite our understanding of how civilization began in West Africa, proving that the foundations of great empires were not laid by outside forces, but were homegrown in the rich, silty soil of the Sahel, waiting thousands of years for their story to be told. Our final journey into the sands takes us to a people whose name is etched not only in stone, but in the very fabric of divine scripture and imperial annals. In the stark, volcanic landscapes of northwestern Arabia, a civilization emerged that seemed to defy the desert itself by becoming one with it. This was the Kingdom of Thamud, a people whose incredible architectural prowess was matched only by the mystery of their sudden and complete disappearance from the historical stage, leaving behind a legacy carved into the mountains that continues to baffle and intrigue to this day. The Thamudans enter the historical record through two vastly different yet equally compelling sources. The first is the military chronicles of the mighty Assyrian Empire. An inscription from the 8th century before the Common Era, commissioned by the Assyrian king Sargon II, lists the Thamud among the distant desert peoples who paid him tribute. This brief mention is incredibly significant. It proves that the Thamud were not a local tribe, but a recognized political entity powerful enough to be noted by the world's first superpower. Their name appears alongside other major Arabian kingdoms, placing them firmly in the complex web of ancient Near Eastern geopolitics. The second and more detailed account comes from the Quran centuries later. Here, the story of the Thamud is presented as a profound moral lesson. They are described as a people of great skill and prosperity who grew arrogant and turned away from God. They were sent a prophet, Salih, who urged them to repent. To demonstrate his divine authority, God produced a miraculous she-camel from a rock, instructing the Thamud to share their water with it. When they hamstrung and killed the sacred animal instead, they sealed their own fate, calling down a cataclysmic punishment that destroyed their civilization. This narrative, while theological, points to a deep-seated cultural memory of a powerful kingdom that met a sudden and devastating end. The most breathtaking and enduring evidence of the Thamudic civilization is the cities they left behind, most notably at Al-Haya, known today as Madain Sale. Long before the Nabataeans arrived and expanded the site, the Thamud were the original architects of this rocky sanctuary. Their technique was not to build upward but to carve inward. Using simple iron tools and an immense amount of collective labor, they carefully chiseled exquisite homes, tombs, and sanctuaries directly into the sheer faces of the sandstone mountains. These were not crude caves. They were sophisticated dwellings with leveled floors, smoothed walls, and elaborate facades that often featured monumental steps, pilasters, and animal motifs like eagles and snakes, which likely held deep religious significance. The precision of this work in such a hard material is a staggering achievement. It speaks to a highly organized society with specialized craftsmen, a clear artistic vision, and a profound understanding of their environment. They didn't fight the desert's harshness. They used it, creating permanent, climate-controlled refuges that were cool in the blistering heat and safe from the elements and enemies. For all their skill, the Thamudans eventually vanished. The question of what happened to them is one of archaeology's great cold cases with several compelling theories. The Quranic account suggests a sudden, divinely sent catastrophe, which some scholars interpret as a possible massive earthquake or a deadly volcanic eruption from one of the many dormant volcanoes that dot the region, an event so destructive it entered legend as a punishment from God. Another possibility is military conquest. The rise of new powers in Arabia, such as the Nabataeans to the north, could have led to a violent campaign that absorbed or annihilated the Thamudic heartland. A third, more gradual theory points to a severe and prolonged drought. The Thamud, despite their ingenuity, were still dependent on water. A shift in climate that permanently dried up their wells and ended the seasonal rains would have made their mountain homes unsustainable, forcing them to abandon their cities and scatter into the desert, where they were eventually absorbed by other nomadic tribes, their distinct identity dissolving over time. The modern story of the Thamud is one of rediscovery and ongoing mystery. For centuries, their spectacular sites were known only to the local Bedouin, who often regarded them with superstition, believing them to be haunted places cursed by God. Western explorers began to document the ruins in the 19th century, but it is only in recent decades that systematic archaeology has begun. The vast majority of the Arabian desert remains unexplored, and scholars are confident that hundreds, if not thousands, of Thamudic sites are still hidden beneath the dunes, waiting to be found. The most promising clues lie in the hundreds of thousands of Thamudic inscriptions, short messages, names, and prayers carved onto rock faces throughout Saudi Arabia and southern Jordan. These inscriptions, written in a primitive North Arabian script, are like a vast, scattered library. While many are simple graffiti left by passing nomads, others undoubtedly hold the keys to understanding their language, their beliefs, and their history. Deciphering this immense epigraphic corpus is a monumental task that could ultimately reveal the true story of the Thamud, not as a cautionary myth, but as a real, complex, and ingenious kingdom that mastered the art of living in one of the most unforgiving landscapes on Earth, only to have their monumental achievements reclaimed by the very sands they once defied. But perhaps the most chilling aspect of these desert burials isn't the power of the sand itself, but the unseen force that often set it in motion, a radical and abrupt shift in the very climate that had once made these kingdoms possible. We've seen how human ingenuity could create oases of civilization in the most hostile environments, but that delicate balance was always at the mercy of a changing planet. Time and again, the archaeological record reveals a heartbreaking pattern, not of a slow decline, but of a sudden, unthinkable collapse triggered by environmental catastrophe. The story of the Garamantes offers a powerful case study. Their entire existence was a miracle of hydrological engineering, a thousand-year defiance of the Sahara's arid nature. But their triumph contained the seeds of their own demise. They were essentially mining fossil water, a finite resource trapped underground since a wetter climatic era. As they expanded their fagaras to feed a growing population, they were withdrawing water far faster than it could ever be replenished. This unsustainable practice made them incredibly vulnerable. Then the climate itself delivered the final blow. Paleoclimatologists studying sediment cores and cave formations have found compelling evidence that around the 5th century of the Common Era, the Sahara entered an even drier phase. The already scarce rains became even more unreliable, and the underground aquifers, already stressed from overuse, began to fail completely. The magnificent irrigation channels ran dry, the fields that had once bloomed turned to dust, and the desert they had held at bay for a millennium began its final, inexorable advance. Their story is a stark, ancient warning about the peril of building a civilization on a non-renewable resource, especially when the climate itself becomes an adversary. This pattern of a green Sahara giving way to the desert we know today is one of the most dramatic climate shifts in human history. Around 3,300 years before the Common Era, the entire region was a vast mosaic of savanna grasslands, shimmering lakes, and flowing rivers, home to hippos, giraffes, and elephants, as stunningly depicted in the rock art of places like the Tassili Ennaja Plateau in Algeria. The people living there were not desert dwellers but pastoralists and hunters. Then, a gradual shift in the Earth's orbit altered monsoon patterns, causing the rains to retreat southward over a period of centuries. The grasslands withered, the lakes evaporated, and the sand dunes began to form, swallowing an area the size of the continental United States. This wasn't a slow fade. For the people living through it, it was an existential crisis that unfolded over generations, forcing a massive human migration toward the Nile Valley and the remaining oases. This event set the stage for all future desert kingdoms, creating the harsh but mineral-rich landscape that would later be connected by trade routes. It also buried countless earlier settlements from this greener period, places that are only now being discovered by radar scanning beneath the modern dunes, revealing a lost world that was utterly transformed by climate change. On the other side of the world, a similar tragedy was unfolding in the Taklamakan Desert, where the oasis kingdom of Loulan met its end not with a dramatic sinkhole, but with a silent hydrological strangulation. Loulan's entire reason for being was the life-giving water of the Tarim River, which snaked down from the distant Kunlun Mountains, creating a fragile ribbon of green in a sea of sand. Chinese records from the Tang dynasty note that around the year 630, an envoy arrived at Loulan only to find a ghost town, the streets empty, belongings left behind, a civilization frozen in time. The cause was a catastrophic failure of its water supply. The question is, what caused the river to change its course or simply vanish? The evidence points to a dual assault from both humanity and nature. The people of Loulan, in their efforts to expand agriculture to support a growing population, engaged in extensive irrigation. This large-scale diversion of water for farms and canals can drastically reduce a river's flow downstream over time, slowly starving the main settlement. This human-made pressure was then compounded by a major climatic event. Tree ring data and ice core studies from glaciers in Central Asia indicate a prolonged and severe drought period right around the time of Loulan's abandonment. With reduced snowfall in the mountains, the glacial meltwater that fed the Tarim River would have dwindled to a trickle. The combination was fatal. The irrigation systems upstream took too much and the sky provided too little. The river that was Loulan's lifeline retreated, the canals silted up, and the desert, always waiting, moved in. Within a few years, sandstorms had buried the streets and orchards, creating the incredibly preserved time capsule that 20th century explorers would stumble upon, where even the bodies of the last inhabitants were freeze-dried by the hyper-arid air, a poignant testament to a sudden, climate-driven evacuation. What makes the fall of these kingdoms so hauntingly relevant is that it shows us how climate change acts as a threat multiplier. It rarely destroys a civilization on its own. Instead, it exacerbates existing weaknesses, whether it's the Garamantes' over-reliance on fossil water or Loulan's over-extended irrigation, pushing a stable society past its breaking point. A prolonged drought can lead to crop failure, which leads to famine, which leads to social unrest and makes a kingdom vulnerable to its enemies. We see this with the Ghana Empire, whose decline was accelerated by a centuries-long drought that crippled its agriculture at the very moment it was facing military pressure from the Almoravids. The sand that buried these cities was simply the final shroud. The real cause of death was a complex chain reaction started by a shift in the weather. These ancient lessons echo down to us today. They stand as silent, sandy memorials to the fact that a changing climate is not a future abstraction. It is a powerful historical force that has shaped the fate of human civilizations for millennia, reminding us that even the greatest of our achievements are fragile in the face of a planet in flux. For centuries, the only tools available to find these lost kingdoms were the trowel, the shovel, and a hefty dose of luck. Explorers like Sven Hedin stumbled upon Loulan by pure chance, driven off course by a desert storm. But today, we are witnessing a revolution in discovery, a new golden age of archaeology driven not by picks and camels, but by satellites, lasers, and radar. This high-tech treasure hunt is peeling back the sandy layers of the desert from orbit, revealing outlines of entire cities that have been completely invisible to every generation that came before us. The most famous of these high-tech discoveries began not in a desert canyon, but in a laboratory at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory in California. Researchers, including a team from NASA, were analyzing radar data from the Space Shuttle Challenger mission STS-40-1G. Their goal was to map ancient caravan routes in Oman's brutal empty quarter. The radar's unique ability to penetrate the dry surface sand revealed a web of ancient paths like ghostly fingerprints on the landscape, and all of these paths converged on a single, specific point. When archaeologists followed this celestial map, they found themselves standing amidst the crumbled walls and fallen towers of a fortress city. They had, against all odds, found the fabled Ubar, the Atlantis of the sands, not by following a scrap of parchment, but by heeding the guidance of a machine that had flown in space. This same powerful technology is now being deployed across the globe's arid regions. In the dense jungles of Central America, LiDAR, light detection and ranging, has revealed sprawling Mayan megacities hidden for a millennium under the canopy. Now, that same laser technology is being turned on the deserts. Mounted on aircraft or drones, LiDAR scanners fire millions of laser pulses at the ground. By measuring the tiny differences in how long it takes each pulse to bounce back, they can create an incredibly detailed, three-dimensional map of the surface topography, effectively digitally stripping away every inch of sand and vegetation. In the Sahara, this is revealing the true scale of the Garamantes civilization in Libya. What were once thought to be a handful of isolated forts are now understood to be part of a vast, interconnected network of farms, cemeteries, and satellite villages, all connected by their sophisticated fagaras, the underground irrigation channels. The LiDAR maps show these features with stunning clarity, proving the Garamantes didn't just have a capital city. They built an entire green, fertile province in the heart of the desert, a civilization whose full extent we are only just beginning to comprehend. But technology doesn't always need to be so complex to be effective. In many cases, the most valuable tool is simply a new way of looking at something we already have. Declassified satellite imagery from Cold War-era Corona spy missions has become an unexpected godsend for archaeologists. These black and white photos, taken in the 1960s and 70s to monitor military installations, provide a priceless snapshot of the Middle Eastern landscape before decades of modern urbanization, farming, and war irrevocably altered it. Scientists are meticulously scanning these old photos, and in the process, they are identifying thousands of previously unknown archaeological sites, old tells, ancient roads, and the faint outlines of buried structures that have since been plowed under or built over. This archival imagery acts as a time machine, allowing us to see the land as it was half a century ago and pinpoint exactly where to look for the past before it vanishes completely. And sometimes the desert itself does the work for us. The very force that buries these cities, the wind, can also, in a moment, reveal them. Sandstorms of biblical proportions can scour the landscape, moving entire dunes and stripping away layers of sediment that have accumulated over centuries. In Egypt, at a site called Tel Edfu, a particularly fierce storm once ripped the sand away to expose the upper sections of a large administrative building from ancient Egypt's Old Kingdom, a period from which very few standing structures survive. Similarly, in Sudan, high winds have repeatedly uncovered new sections of the vast Kerma necropolis, revealing beautifully preserved pottery and artifacts that were placed in tombs over 3,500 years ago. These accidental discoveries are a thrilling reminder that despite all our advanced technology, the desert remains an active partner in this exploration, occasionally and dramatically offering up its secrets on its own terms, if only we are quick enough to see them before the sands inevitably blow back and reclaim their treasure.